Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Hey Mark, can you hear us okay? Yep, we're going on to public session now, Mark.
Actually live now.
Okay, thank you Clerk and Margie and my members to Fáilte Roa Lig. We do have quorum and I now call the meeting to order and welcome each of you to the 76th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. May I remind members also about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices. Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras and sensitivity of the microphones throughout the course of the meeting. And could I ask members on Zoom to be mindful of background images. Agenda item 1, members, is declaration of interest, and remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do members have any items of interest they wish to declare? No? Members okay, thank you. Okay, members, apologies. Are members aware of any apologies? Clerk? No. Okay, members, then moving on to Chair's business then. I'd just like to remind members of the joint informal meeting with the Finance Committee on digital infrastructure and cyber security risks across the community and voluntary sector, due to take place on Tuesday 10th of March from 12:30 to 2 p.m. in room 29, and I would appreciate members' attendance if possible. Further information in relation to this item can be found in correspondence item 11.7 on page 438 of your meeting pack. Also, members, I noted the announcement in relation to £9 million grassroots football facilities programme announced in media and via WMS yesterday. I propose, members, that we seek a briefing from officials in relation to this programme. Members content? Thank you. Agenda item 4, members, draft minutes from the meeting on 26th of February, and they're contained at page 7. Do members have any edits or amendments to the draft minutes? No, thank you. Are members then content, therefore, to agree the minutes of 26th of February as drafted? Content, members? Thank you. Agenda item 5, members, is an SL1. It's the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order NI 2026. This SL1 was received on the 18th of February, and the relevant papers can be found in the meeting pack at page 20. Members will recall that the Minister requested a shortened time frame for this rule, and that we received a briefing from the Department last week in relation to this SL1, and agreed to take a number of actions, which were to publish the Department's papers, issue a call for evidence with a closing date of 11th of March, reconsider the SL1 today, together with any responses from the call for evidence. So, do members have any comments, or are you content, members, for the Department to make the rule? Members content. Thank you. Agenda item 6, members, is SL1 Social Security and Statutory Maternity Pay Evidence of Pregnancy Amendment Regulations 2026. This SL1 was received on the 18th of February, and the relevant papers can be found in our meeting pack at page 37. Members will recall that the Minister requested a shortened time frame for this rule, and that we received a briefing from the Department last week in relation to this SL1, and agreed to publish the Department's papers, issue a call for evidence with a closing date of 11th of March, and reconsider the SL1 today, together with any responses from the call for evidence. You will also note that we did not have a draft SREM for this SL1 last week. However, we have now received this EM, and it does have an impact on our table paper ordering, which I'll come to later, and just direct members towards the later table papers that were issued at 7:52. So, do members have any comment, or are they content for the Department to proceed to make the rule? Content. Thank you, members. Okay, members, then moving on to today's briefings. So, members, as you're aware, we have all 11 councils represented here today. Pause now or do the intro?
I think it might be better to do it when the officers are in place, Chair.
Okay, so in order to get everyone in place, we're going to take a short pause to get people into place.
Okay.
Thank you, Clerk.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber.
She confirmed live.
Thank you. Okay, members, so we're resuming then in live with broadcasting resumed, and we're moving on to today's briefings, which are, as you're aware, members, we have all 11 councils represented here today, and we've planned to hear directly from them in 3 sets of panels discussing each council's position and approach to anti-poverty efforts here. By way of reminder for the council officers here today, we as a committee have had a particular interest in and focus on the anti-poverty strategy since the committee was established. In pursuing this interest through our statutory scrutiny role, it became clear to members that local councils do a significant amount of work and in this area. And last spring, just a second. So last spring, summer, the committee agreed to hold a focus meeting with all councils to hear about all of your roles in relation to the implementation of the draft strategy. I'm sure you'll all agree that this is a significant approach and a significant strategy that requires a cohesive partnership approach. I think committee have been very conscious that the ability of councils to act as a very important partner in relation to this is something that we've been very, very keen on. Therefore, I'd like to thank all council officers for their attendance here today and for corresponding with us since last May and for the submission of additional information for members in advance of today's meeting. We note that some of you have travelled some considerable distance, and this has taken time out of what I'm sure are busy working days for all of you, and we're really glad to have this session with you all. Councils are a frequent issue that arise in this, and none more so importantly than in terms of the anti-poverty session. So we're now moving to our first panel, and that's agenda item 7, Local Councils and the Anti-Poverty Strategy, Oral Evidence, Panel 1. The papers, members, for this agenda item is at pages 52 to pages 106 of the meeting pack and pages 4 to 31 of your tabled papers. Can I now welcome the following officials to the meeting? Ronan McKenna, and Ronan's Director of Community and Culture in Antrim and Newtownabbey Borough Council. Patricia Mackey, Community Planning and Climate Manager, Ards and North Down Borough Council. Kevin Heaney, who is Head of Inclusive Growth and Anti-Poverty in Belfast City Council, and David Burns, who is Chief Executive of Lisburn and Castlereagh City Council. So I'm going to invite each of you in turn to make a brief opening statement before we move to questions from members. So I'm proposing that we will go to Ronan first, then Patricia, then Kevin, and then David. So, Lana Riley, obviously conscious of time and conscious there could be a good bit of overlap, so we'll try and work our way through it as succinctly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks members for the opportunity to present to you this morning regarding the anti-poverty strategy. Based on the correspondence we received from the committee clerks on the 18th of February, we've furnished the committee with a written response based on the 3 areas: the consultation feedback, local interventions that we've been leading in Antrim and Newtownabbey, and the integration piece as well. I'll just give a quick brief overview, not get into the detail because members have already been furnished with that. Firstly, we welcome the statutory commitment to publish an anti-poverty strategy under Section 28E of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. And the anti-poverty strategy, the draft, promotes a whole government approach, which is obviously welcome, and likened to community planning, where we've had some success with since the establishment of RPA and refined local government. We welcome this in principle, but it's a practical integration that probably needs further clarity, in our view, to develop, as poverty is multidimensional. The strategy needs to go further in defining council's role. You've already outlined, Chair, the importance of the councils can play, and that was demonstrated throughout the COVID pandemic, on our flexibility and agile, and working with the community and voluntary sector to be responsive in terms of dealing with that, and identifying formal mechanisms that we can link in with the executive to define then local structures. Also, the reference around pool budget or joint commission is laid in the strategy, and we would encourage the executive and the assembly to look further at looking at financial and budget alignment to this. And while the whole government approach is evident, we feel that the strategy cannot be achieved without budget alignment and policy coherence. We would also encourage that it's enhanced through smart targets, measurable indicators, and a full and costed delivery plan. We believe the focus of that should be around skills gaps for local residents, unemployment, low wages, housing pressures, increasing food and fuel insecurity, and dealing with people with lived experience of these, making sure that they're involved in the co-design of the strategy, and making sure that there's governance mechanisms around participation for that as well. In terms of the anti-poverty strategy, we welcome that it's a cross-departmental policy alignment aligned to community planning. And we would encourage that around smart targets, pool budgets, and clear local delivery frameworks that enable councils and community and voluntary sector to integrate and deliver on behalf of their local residents. We would encourage that specific role for councils to be clearly identified and define the partnership structures. Examples that might include the labour market partnerships, where we've had successful, funded through the DFC that members will be familiar with as well, and how we can build on that successes, because that's been a good conduit where money is filtered from central government into local councils, and then we've been able to engage at local ground with local businesses, community and voluntary sector, etc., to increase employability and training and skills and address some of them gaps. So from our point of view, in conclusion of the strategy for the first part, it requires operational design. That would be more detail in terms of that, and the cross-departmental ambition needs to go further in terms of establishing resource and accountability and local integration mechanisms. We in Antrim and Newtownabbey Borough Council feel that we're ready and positioned. We've developed our own strategy in relation to anti-poverty, and we believe that we're well positioned to support the Executive and the Northern Ireland Assembly in capable of delivering sustainable poverty solutions. and reducing poverty. Just in terms of light touch, in terms of local interventions, again, we furnished you within our packs, but some of the successes, and I'm sure some of my council colleagues will touch on these as well. We've had successes through the likes of the social supermarket initiative being delivered at local level. We've also encouraged and worked with the community and voluntary sector to develop stuff like school uniform recycling schemes at local level. Community fridges have been rolled out, and even Christmas toy recycling schemes. So they're just practical measures that we've had successes at local level in Antrim and Newtownabbey. But again, building on the more strategic content around the labour market partnerships and how we can go further. Again, we've had some successes where we've had over 125 participants in our labour market partnership academies, through academies and skills, and then leading to employment, series of job fairs, etc. as well. And I think it would be important for me to mention our community advice partners on the ground. Again, each of the councils will be involved with different contracts. We work very closely with Community Advice Antrim and Newtownabbey to deliver a range of anti-poverty measures, and they're experts in terms of benefit advice, debt management plan, crisis intervention, etc., etc. So working with them to make sure that there's financial planning and security in the long term. You know, it's well versed where the community and voluntary sector is currently sitting at the minute, and I think that cognizant and realisation of that, and again picking up on the COVID and going back to the successes that we had at that period and building and strengthening the resilience of our community and voluntary sector would be critical as well. Just in closing, Chair, then the integration from our perspective in Antrim and Newtownabbey needs to focus on that economic participation, the health and well-being, social inclusion and access to essential services, which would always obviously be linked to advice services as well. We want to see that integration with our labour market partnership, where we think we're starting to get successes, but the journey in anti-poverty and addressing that won't be an overnight fix. It'll be a long-term strategic solution. Also alignment with housing supply and infrastructure, childcare strategy, which I know the Executive and the Assembly are pushing forward as well, and skills strategies. We want to work in multi-agency, similar to what we've built under community planning with a range of networks. We can't do this alone, and we need the support of wider statutory agencies as well. So effective partnership planning, workforce stability aligned to funding, long-term impact measurement and associated funding will be the key to that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ronan. Patricia?
Thanks, Chair and members, for inviting me along today to speak about anti-poverty and to give Ards and North Down Borough Council's position on this. In Ards and North Down, our community planning partnership has made reducing poverty and inequality a priority. The Council has done similar within our own corporate plan. Despite our borough's reputation for affluence, the evidence is telling us a very, very different story. Poverty is rising. We used to be one of the least affected areas, but recent data on both relative and absolute poverty actually now places us above the Northern Ireland average and mid-table in relation to other council areas. More households are struggling with food insecurity, high housing and energy costs, unaffordable childcare and growing personal debt. And many of those affected actually fall just above entitlement thresholds, which means that, you know, hardship is often hidden. Both urgent short-term support and long-term structural solutions are required for this. The complication is that although councils have a clear role in tackling poverty, I would say we don't really have clarity around the specifics of what that role actually is. You know, anti-poverty, it's not one of our statutory functions. And while health, education and housing partners all absolutely contribute to the solutions, tackling poverty isn't actually their core function either. And as a result of this, what we find is that there's no real natural local lead, even though joined up local action is absolutely essential. And in Ards and North Down, this gap means that Council, we have tried to step forward to try and coordinate our own community planning partnership. But I suppose without real clear expectations, authority, resources, or even a shared framework that aligns this local responsibility with what the regional one actually is. And this creates real risks, you know, fragmented activity, duplication across partners, and I suppose too much focus on really treating symptoms instead of actually really trying to address the underlying causes of poverty. One of the big questions for me around the whole anti-poverty strategy is how is it going to give councils and our community planning partners and our other local partners the clarity that we need really on what our respective roles are to make sure that local action becomes coherent, that it's coordinated and that it's genuinely about the whole system rather than just a continuation of really good but possibly unconnected programmes. In Ards and North Down Borough Council, we are trying to identify what our own anti-poverty levers are across all of our different service areas, so from like procurement to climate action, community development, regeneration, employability, etc. Because I want to be able to show our community planning partners and also my colleagues where we have influence and the type of influence that we have. My written submission does mention some of this work activity along with some of the other things that Ronan had mentioned around like the labour market partnership and the social supermarkets, which are all really, really important interventions. I think for the work that we're trying to do through community planning and internally within the council, what we really need is a strategy that sets clear expectations for councils and our community planning partnerships. We can only facilitate effectively when our authority, responsibilities and resources are clearly defined as part of this whole of government approach. We need to try and identify who is best placed to lead and coordinate anti-poverty work locally. If leadership is left unspecified, councils, we do tend to inherit these things by default. Our influence is possibly the smallest out of all of our various partners, but we do lead the facilitation of community planning partners, which I think is where we really have the opportunity to step up. But if it's undefined, then this is going to create an inconsistent approach across Northern Ireland. We need a strategy that is going to support all partners to understand their contribution, through shared data and common indicators. And I think this includes mechanisms that ensures lived experience and community perspectives shape the design and delivery of the support that's actually needed, because without this we're not going to be able to deliver effective prevention or the long-term pathways out of poverty that we really, really need. If the strategy is able to provide this clarity around coordination and leadership, councils and partners across Northern Ireland, I think, will be able to work much more effectively together. There'll be clear integration between regional strategy and local delivery, stronger support for the proven local interventions, and a coherent framework that prevents duplication and ensures that resources are actually targeted where they're going to have the greatest impact. This is the opportunity that the strategy has, and I think it's why getting this right matters so much. So thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, for inviting me today to the session. And as you did mention, some of my points I'm going to raise do connect with my local government colleagues. We have shared with the committee the formal response that the council had submitted to the draft anti-poverty strategy. But as said previously, as part of the council's recent refresh of its community plan, the Belfast agenda, a key and immediate area of concern emerging from the stakeholder group, the engagement with voluntary representation, citizens, communities of interest, elected members, was a growing poverty crisis which was impacting on the city. No longer was poverty a thing. It's now a norm across many sectors, and the big issue around in-work and poverty has become really important. One of the big areas I would commend to the department, to the committee, is the importance of data and evidence. This is very important in tackling poverty. It helps us understand where the pressures are greatest, who is most affected, and how poverty is changing over time. But data alone is not enough. It's how you use that data to focus activity and focus priorities. I would commend to the committee a recent research report from Joseph Rowntree Foundation on December this year, which gives some really startling facts. 110,000 children in Northern Ireland live in poverty. 29.6% of children in Belfast live in poverty. But it also draws out that not only at a city, at a macro level, there is significant concentration in poverty. For instance, in Belfast West, there's 33% of all children living in poverty. Some of the startling facts that it draws out that 6 in 10 children in poverty live in households where one or more of the adults are in work. So it's just the diversification of poverty. It's is something to be aware of. In terms of the Council's response and input into the draft strategy, in responding, the Council did, in principle, support the vision, the ambition and the broad aims of the strategy, but it did have concerns, however, in relation to the absence of any detail in terms of specific actions, timescales and SMART targets. Some of the more specific points that the Council had raised in response was we did think that there was an absence of potentially a fourth pillar that focused on prevention, calling out explicitly in the strategy as a strategic direction of travel, so it's prevention of poverty. The need to develop and embed measurable targets, i.e. reducing child poverty, so it's something that can be tangible, that we can test and measure all our successes against. The need, as we said previously, for clear accountability across the system, not only across central government departments, but also the role of local government and other stakeholders within that whole ecosystem of support. We did feel that the proposal that was put forward by the Anti-Poverty Network around an independent Poverty and Equality Commission would be beneficial, because ultimately it would hold us all to account as a collective system and how we help alleviating poverty. What we did also highlight that there is a lot of great activity, some examples already highlighted before, place-based interventions. So it's recognising what works well already on the ground and enhancing and sustaining. Big issues is the sustainability of funding, and one of the other things we were saying, multi-year funding to establish impactful programmes will start to make a difference. In terms of some of the local interventions, again in our response we drew out some practical examples of what we did, but I'll give a quick summary. Since 2022, the Council, working initially for the first 2 years with the Department, delivered a hardship programme. It was in excess of an annual hardship programme of about 1 million plus. Its focus was multiple-fold. It sought to bring forward an intervention support for children and young people. It looked at supporting individuals and families in their emergency need, and importantly focused on supporting elderly people and people finding themselves in isolation. We did, as I said earlier, we didn't create new things. We worked with core delivery and support agencies on the ground, and we enhanced their ability to do more. So we added additionality, and that was for the first time for the Council. Even Belfast City Council, we work with our schools network within the city. Last year, for instance, we gave $250,000 through to all schools of every age, nursery right through to grammar to special needs schools, to enable them to do additional stuff such as breakfast clubs, hot school meals, uniforms. So that was the first, we were going beyond our statutory remit, but our members thought that was the best way to address poverty is our youth and our children and young people. We enhanced another good thing referred to earlier, and again co-funded with the AFC, is the social supermarkets. We think that is a real viable and beneficial and impactful model, because not only does it provide access to immediate need, it also gives people pathways out of poverty, because there is that wraparound support that enables them to enter employment opportunities, training opportunities. So we would really advocate this, the retention and the scalability, upscaling of that service. Some of the other local examples was the advice services. We put a lot of money with the DFC, £2 million last year, into our advice services and helping to diversify, taking them on board the data and what types of advice people needed. Again, pathways out of employment, employability and skills, some of the local initiatives that we're doing with that. And a practical but impactful initiative that the Council has implemented over the last 3 years was a cost of living guidebook. Basically what this is people don't know what they don't know, and putting a list of the types of services and references points and support agencies in a document that people could just take away and themselves has been really impactful. And last year alone, I think it was 55,000 of these either downloaded or taken away over the period of the year. So something really simple and practical on the ground. In terms of the integration and the working together, similar to before, we feel that no organisation, sector or government department can tackle poverty on their own. It's all about integration and collaboration. We do feel that community planning provides a real possible platform to support greater integration, avoid duplication and importantly, maximise collective resource efficiency and collective energy. The Council again has recently brought together a citywide and cross-sectoral anti-poverty network which brings together service providers, lived experience, community partners and other agencies to understand what types of support does exist and understanding the referral pathways within the city. So when one individual would go to same community seeking certain advice, they know if it's not the advice they can provide, who to pass it on to. So our members has agreed that we will continue to support this and that will be our sort of helping us shape our interventions and focus around poverty going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin and David. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Thanks for the opportunity to attend the committee today to discuss addressing poverty in Northern Ireland. Lisburn, Castlereagh and councils more generally have strong partnership arrangements in place with DFC as a sponsored department for the anti-poverty strategy. DFC colleagues provided our council and local organisations with the opportunity to contribute to the strategy development during the consultation phase. We did ask that councils and community organisations be involved from the outset in development of future strategies. Our focus as a council has been in delivering better services to our residents, businesses and visitors. We take great pride in delivering high quality services to our residents. As the most localised form of government, I would argue that our officers and councillors are best placed to understand what communities need and want. As such, our council has developed several initiatives that impact both directly and indirectly on poverty. Although Lisburn Castlereagh is generally seen as an affluent area, 13% of the population live in poverty, many of whom are in employment. Some of our initiatives are aimed at community-wide level, predominantly through grant funding aimed at building capacity, increasing resilience and general well-being. Programmes we develop recognise the hardship that can be faced more prominently at particular times in the year. Our fantastic and free Christmas Light Festival attracted 166,000 people this year. We deliver a range of free city centre activities such as walking tours from our museum and free play opportunities for kids, whilst we offer a number of free summer programmes delivered through local sports groups and community groups. With funding support from DFC and DFE, we deliver and support initiatives for those seeking employment or benefits advice. Furthermore, we support our local food banks and social supermarket projects. Like all councils, we're very aware of the financial challenges facing the executive over the coming period. There's a need to do more with less, therefore. I believe more efficient and effective service could be delivered through joined-up funding across executive departments to community planning partnerships, with relevant work being commissioned through councils. This would provide greater administrative efficiencies through monitoring and reporting, while services would be truly joined up and targeted through community planning partnerships. Through an improved and more focused programme for government, community planning partnerships could make real and lasting impact at a local level to meet meaningful national objectives. To achieve this, momentum is required to streamline processes, map executive funding, and to consider key targets against which the executive wishes to measure itself against. As a comparator, Scottish outcome-focused systems aim to ensure community planning partnerships and councils deliver effectively against national outcomes. To make a meaningful impact, a relaxation is required in existing data sharing barriers. Health, housing, police, benefits teams and NISRA should all be working more effectively to share data to allow services to be focused on those in greatest need. Data zone and single output zone information does not provide the information required to target services at specific individuals and families. An example of this is the economically inactive. In Lisburn Castlereagh, 14% of the working age are economically inactive. That's approximately 14,000 people. Of that figure, there are almost 8% more women economically inactive than men. Through our labour market partnership, we have developed skills courses aimed at bringing more women into the workforce. Meanwhile, some local businesses have reflected on contract hours of employment to recognise child and care commitments. Without data to identify those individuals to allow for a more targeted approach, such initiatives must be advertised universally and hope that those in greatest need apply. Finally, the macro environment can impact on the best efforts of government. As can be seen this week, the Executive has no control over rising fuel and energy costs from global considerations. Therefore, targets focused on bringing a set number of people out of poverty through energy efficiency measures, for example, are set up to fail due to those external pressures. In summary, I welcome the direction and cross-departmental approach taken to developing the anti-poverty strategy. I would ask that a more cohesive approach be adopted in taking forward the plan jointly between the executive departments, councils and community planning partnerships. Clear objectives for the community planning partnerships, simplified reporting and better use of data are essential if we wish to achieve lasting impact for those in greatest need. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and that was very useful, and it's interesting to hear the different perspectives but also the synergies across them, and I have to say that's a very important point you finished on, the elephant in the room this morning being another conflict, another spike in prices with people already so hard pressed, huge spike in obviously oil for home heating, and that'll affect probably some of the councils greater than others, and the potential increase in food inflation, which is really hurting families extremely at this time. So that's an interesting and a worrying context within which we're operating. So I'm going to be as brief as possible. If I could ask, maybe suggest that on any of the questions, if one person leads on that question, and then if people want to contribute or challenge or just have a different perspective on an answer or contribute something additional, but rather than going to everybody for every question, if we could get people to lead on the questions, and we'll take it that way. So I suppose first of all, were you disappointed that the strategy doesn't mention the pivotal role that local councils play in tackling poverty, nor give any clue to the role they would play in the implementation? Do you think you could be more centrally involved in the strategy as per the draft that was released?
Me to take this.
Patricia, yeah.
I obviously mentioned in my verbal submission an awful lot about the fact that we don't really have clarity around our role, and so I think the strategy, I can't even remember whether it mentioned us anywhere in it, but it really was, it didn't provide us any clarity as to what it is that we need to do. So I think, yes, we were disappointed that it didn't specifically mention either councils or community planning partnerships, because obviously they're our key way of trying to I suppose get that sort of synergy and local cohesion at a local level.
Okay, thank you. And the other one for me then was in relation, I think it was mentioned by everyone, but I know in particular two or three of you focus on, and the committee has itself been keen to focus on that issue around targets. How essential do you see as targets being in terms of the finalised strategy to make a difference?
You go. I think it's absolutely essential. I think that joined up piece of work that I saw where the departments are coming together with councils and community planning partnerships are absolutely fundamental to the direction of travel of this. I think we do have to just be careful that there will be different challenges for rural areas to inner urban areas, and therefore those targets, I think, need to be focused on outcomes. It's about making the difference. What's the actual difference on the ground for people? And then it's for community planning partnerships with their local community groups to consider how best they can help to achieve those overall outcomes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going then to members. I'm going to Pam, then Sian, then Kelly, then Morris. Go ahead, Pam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your attendance today. Very important subject, and we know through our own work as MLAs on the ground, you know, the good work that councils do, and we do very much rely on that local base to basically carry out the work that initially starts here in this place. I suppose in terms of ensuring that people are armed and equipped with good mechanisms to lift themselves out of poverty, I suppose one of the couple of main factors I think in there is housing, having a good roof over your head, and employment. And when I say employment, I don't mean just any job. I mean good jobs, quality jobs that are, you know, well paid, because it does take an awful lot of money now to live and get by these days. We know the costs continue to rise and those challenges continue to exist. I suppose what do you see in terms of how do we not duplicate the work that's done regionally, locally? That would be the first point. And also, what gaps do you see, or what further do you need in terms of resources or flexibilities to address skills gaps in particular, and to support residents into good quality, high, stable employment?
Go ahead.
Happy to lead out on the first point, just in terms of the planning and the housing issue. In terms of that, I think the community planning partnership, I think all my colleagues had mentioned that in terms of the importance of that, and I think that's the vehicle that this should be driven through, because if we go down just engaging from an assembly to councils locally, then we don't have that collective opportunity where we engage the housing executive and other. We obviously have responsibility for planning within councils as well, so I think that whole approach in the community planning partnerships are set up to enable them conversations in terms of the skills gaps and enhancing them. It's the ongoing work. I think we've all touched on again. Labour market partnerships is successful, but it's in its infancy. To address poverty is going to be a slow burner in terms of skill education academies, where we're going with that, and that comes from the ground up. Each of the council will be individually different, but there's also synergies. I think the chair touched on that as well in terms of what we're trying to do. So I think it's going to be long-term investment, and again, going back to the data, it isn't going to change overnight. While we get skills, it's working with the business community and making sure that them opportunities exist, and listening to the business community as well and opportunities. I mean, you'll be aware, member, of the investment that's happening locally within Antrim Newtownabbey Borough and the opportunities that are coming down the line there. So we need to be skills ready in terms of the pipeline of talent that we're then skilling them up for them job opportunities that are coming down the line, and that takes investment at an early stage to be ready for that when the job opportunities do come along. So it's working in partnership, economic development, housing, planning committees, and that collective approach I think is best driven, and I think we've demonstrated that today through community planning partnerships.
Sure. I just build on that just quickly, is definitely I think that skills piece is so important, and the labour market partnerships has a critical role. But I'm strong, and we all local government, you need to make sure you're reaching and you're proactively trying to reach the hard to reach. So we have a big agenda around inclusive growth, and there's specific cohorts that we know that are really challenging to get them back into the basic entry applause. So local, again, it's about that local intelligence, that local knowledge, that local partnership to being able to mobilise basic community type pathways into opportunities. The other thing is within Belfast, like many of the councils, we're actively working with our business community and really challenging businesses, but in a sensitive way, because we realise the pressures with all businesses. So we have a thing called a good business charter, where we're trying to work to enable businesses not just to access opportunities such as procurement and all of that, but to raise their ambitions and their business practice around real living wage and zero-hour contracts. So there's a bit of that shared impact, shared benefit. So that I know a lot of the councils, not just Belfast, are actively doing that at the minute.
And that gaps piece then, briefly, if somebody could address the gaps that Pam asked about.
In terms of the gaps, each organisation doesn't know what they don't know, and that's part of the challenge. So the housing executive will know which houses needs modernised. The health service will know who their clients in social isolation are. The citizens' advice will know the people that are coming to them with particular poverty issues. But at the moment, because of what Patricia was saying about that lack of leadership from the centre, we're kind of lacking that sort of joined up piece locally to say how do we most focus our interventions to make an impact here. And I feel community planning partnerships have that opportunity if there was a bit of direction and perhaps maybe an element of funding to allow that piece of work to be progressed through research and coordination.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have to move on then. We have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Marisa and Mark also in, so I'll ask members to be really brief. Bear in mind we have 3 panels to get through. Shan, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all so much. I've long been a believer that it is local government will be the on-the-ground delivery for a lot of the work that will go into the anti-poverty strategy to make it most efficient. Some of the things that I'm hearing across all 4 are clarity needed, partnerships, data and targets, and I think that's been coherent across all 4. In terms of data, can you give an outline of, is there any sharing of data at the moment through community planning partnerships from those agencies? I think that you mentioned there, David. What does that look like at the minute? And the other thing then is around the community planning partnerships. Can we have a clearer idea of what they look like? Who makes up your community planning partnership? And are there consistent approaches across each council area?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, in terms of the data, ensuring data, probably right to say that every city's at probably different places, but the intent is there through community planning and all the partners coming together, because it's not just about that individual data, it's how that data layers on one another and you draw the insights from that data. So I know, speaking from a Belfast perspective, we're trying to work, and we've developed a data sharing agreement, which took us a long time to do across different departments, both central government departments, local partners and some of the service providers, just to enable us to share data. And we're putting data analytics support around that, because it's okay having the data, it's actually understand what the data is telling you. So, but I do think community planning does provide that platform in a holistic way. Now, the challenge is, I know from a Belfast perspective, we have good central government input into that, but I know it differs across the region. Because again, there is a number of councils and a lot of the departments and the agencies are regional. So if we could unlock that and secure greater partnership working from particularly regional bodies and statutory departments would be great. In terms of the membership of community planning, there is a range of statutory partners which go from academia, housing executive, health partners, but also the importance of it is the community stakeholders. In Belfast, we have a number of community organisations, and then what we have also is substructures where we mobilise if there's an issue, a specific issue. For instance, this cost of living network is a substructure under community planning where we're bringing everyone with a stake in this area that either provides services, have a lived experience, or can provide resources or insights into the area of data. We're bringing them together to start to understand our strategy for going forward and where we can focus our energy, resources, and importantly our interventions where we can. So it's fair to say that there's definitely a willingness to share and pull data together to inform decision making. I believe there is a good forum and network through community planning to enable that to happen, but I would encourage that the central government departments have a duty at the minute to pay regard to community planning, not to be part of. Now, many do, and I can't say for Belfast we do have the departments, the key departments and the key regional agencies at the table, but it's just...
Yeah, thank you. Kelly, go ahead please.
Thank you very much, folks. As a former Ards and Newtownabbey councillor, I appreciate the work that's done, and of course across all of the councils. One thing that's just come to me, Pam had talked about the gaps. That's one of the things that I'm very concerned about, is duplication of services, and not having a report or an indicator of what's happening everywhere is an issue. But you'd mentioned something earlier, so I'm not going to go over the gap part again, but you'd mentioned something earlier about councils are not defined as a statutory provider of anti-poverty services, and I'm just wondering, in order to deliver going forward, is there any regulation or other changes that would need to take effect to allow you to do this? I know that's a bit of it's
a tough question, yes. Probably would be my answer. I think obviously all of us here are very supportive of that community planning mechanism. I think one of the weaknesses with community planning is, while it is a statutory function, it probably lacks teeth, for want of a better word, because while partners have to be involved, there's no sort of holding to account the level of involvement and what partners actually do. So I think there is something a little bit stronger that we would probably welcome, that actually gives, and again it goes back to that clarity piece, is it a legislative thing, is it something else? But I think there is something that is needed to really I suppose acknowledge who has the role to convene and to encourage, well, stronger than encourage others to actually actively participate.
Just worried because I'm aware that some councils have their community plan in place and are reviewing that, and there's others are still to get there. For instance, we know that PAC, there's a hold up there with some of you. I'm just concerned that if we talk about all of this community planning coming together, but not all councils are in the same place, how would that, is there anything that could be done to affect that, to support?
All councils do have a community plan. We all have published our first community plans, and I think most of us are actually reviewing them. There's the local development plans that obviously align but are separate, and I think they're still kind of...
I'm thinking about that because you talked about housing pressure, so the development plan will bring that in. I'm just thinking, is there anything that we can do as central government to support that process for you?
One of the experiences from other jurisdictions who brought community planning in some time ago is that originally it came in on the basis that it was a participatory type and it didn't really have teeth, and then they moved quite quickly to formal agreements, shared outcome agreements between central and local government, which then gave you that direction, that leadership and that accountability. And I think that is something at the right time, because I do believe that accountability in community planning is currently missing, and the League of Scotland has moved significantly on in terms of in that space.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Morris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. Quite often local councils are the main delivery mechanism for local government here, and quite often undervalued, but I can assure you I value them very highly, being a former councillor. But you highlighted that some of the anti-poverty delivery remains fragmented across different departments, etc., and there's no real coordinating mechanism in place at the minute. So given that you have highlighted sharing data, have you had any experience of GDPR holding back that sharing? And what anti-poverty policies do you think aligns with your community planning partnerships? And how can the executive help the councils financially roll out your plans on behalf of the executive?
I think there's commitment across the board to address poverty, and I think it was Patricia that said that all of us have a commitment to do it, but no department within either Stormont or councils has the statutory function of leading on poverty. So it's good that DFC have at least been targeted, identified as a sponsor department. Some of the challenge, if you were to make it in legislation that councils were responsible for it, the challenge comes back to the data again, because we don't have individual information on any of our residents. So I couldn't tell, if I walk down a street, as will you do, you could probably tell that you're in one of your areas that's got more poverty, but you couldn't tell what the actual cause of it was or what the specific differences were between street A and street B. So therefore, until you actually get to a more granular level of knowing what the particular issues are in a street, it's very difficult to then target services specifically for that nature. So in terms of coming back to your question about where does it best sit, it's that collaboration between central and local government, with each of those departments that we've mentioned previously, be it education, whether it's DFE, DFC, the whole shebang, coming round the table in that sort of co-production model to really address some of these issues, taking on the local knowledge that we have from our communities.
Maybe just...
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
You had I think it was Patricia had mentioned that employment opportunities are a great driver for bringing poverty down, but we have in the Assembly here we have a regional imbalance, and they have a regional balance strategy to try and address that. However, there seems to be a shrinking of opportunity towards the two main cities, and do you as councils find that difficult to try and have investment in your area?
It's not my area of expertise, but I would say from conversations with my colleagues that yes, I mean, we obviously are very close to Belfast, so I think it's fair enough to say that we do have challenges in terms of attracting opportunities to our area. And I know the stats for our area have not particularly changed, but if you live in Ards and North Down and work outside of it, you take home more pay than if you live in Ards and North Down and you work in Ards and North Down. So there is a real issue with high quality jobs, because I think we've all alluded to the fact that actually just having a job these days isn't enough to not be in poverty, that there's an awful lot of people with, you know, both adults in a household working, and poverty is still a big issue for them.
Very briefly, yeah.
Just building on as being obviously here representing Belfast, is one of the challenges for Belfast is there is opportunities, but we need to attract our own residents, because 55% of the people travel into the city to take up the opportunities. So there is still, like all our towns and cities, there's significant concentrations of high levels of need within the city. So we do have that challenge of not retaining the job, but attracting and mobilising and connecting local people into the opportunity.
Sure, if I could just maybe come in very quickly.
Thank you, Morris. Melissa.
I don't know if like.
Sorry, Melissa.
Just very quickly, I suppose the guys have touched on, but we've had a lot of success in Newtownabbey about inward investment, and some of your members will be, acutely aware of that. Given this in their constituency as well, Global Point, has been a huge success for us and continues to grow, for that inward investment. But I suppose the point that I made earlier in terms of that pipeline of opportunity and making sure that the residents are getting skilled up for what them opportunities look for down the line is critical. So there's a join up for me, and the whole government approach is obviously welcome, but it's making sure that that's not siloed in each individual department and we come together under the community plan.
And we're also deeply concerned about the cuts to the local growth fund and the impact that's having exactly on that imperative that you're describing there, and what Westminster are doing in relation to that. So thank you for that, Melissa.
Roger Overleg and Sean, you're all very welcome here today. And I hear too just that need for the integration of services maybe throughout all the different council areas and that as well. So I'll put me two questions into one in a sense, right? Do you feel that the strategy is adequately resourced, we'll say at present, or will councils be adequately resourced to deliver the outcomes? And the second question, in a sense, are councils really seen as strategic partners? Or are they more or less seen just as someone who is there as a delivering agent?
Go ahead.
I'll leave the first part of it. The answer around, is the strategy adequately resourced to deliver the outcomes? I would say I don't know, because the outcomes haven't been defined. I do think there is a costed action plan that is needed, and in terms of, there is a bit of clarification around the leadership and ownership of that action plan, including the role of councils and the role of local partners in delivering that. And I do, like all our councils, we are keen to work with the department, with the executive, to work through the practicalities of what that looks like, to making sure that we can effectively use our collective resources for greatest impact.
And maybe for your second point there, just about strategic versus delivery, we are strategic. We work closely with government for these sorts of issues. As I said in my opening piece, there's probably a need to involve us at an earlier stage to make sure that the strategy is both bottom up as well as top down. But the council is not going to be the only delivery partner. We are probably the glue of a community. We are the part that brings together all of your community planning partners to make sure things are delivered locally. So it's a coordination role as much as anything, because others might be better placed to do things.
Yeah, I go David and Kevin's response there as well. In terms of Antrim Newtownabbey, locally we have embedded our own anti-poverty strategy, and the key function of that in the initial stages was a mapping exercise, and I think it's critical that the central government looks at that mapping exercise as about what is being currently invested. So it's not about new money all the time, it's about what is being invested in, and maybe that's rebranded as such, in terms of it's maybe just not an individual department. This is all done for the good of under anti-poverty or whatever the brand is of that, because there's already significant investment going into economic development, community development, etc., which has been well versed here. It's how we coordinate that approach and then see where the gaps are and see where that additional investment's required, and we've done that locally at Antrim Newtownabbey.
Thank you. And Mark then online. Mark, go ahead please.
Good I heard that, and welcome everyone here today. I think it's bizarre, and the point has been made that councils were kind of conspicuous by their absence in the draft anti-poverty strategy. Local government or councils are more than partners in tackling poverty. I think from what we've heard today and what some of us will have seen or known about in our own council areas, you're leaders in the battle against poverty as well. With regards to the community planning partnerships, I remember at the time of the local government reform bill, there was real pushback from departments and ministers at the time, and that's how it went through, as departments had to pay due regard. Just unfortunately, an earlier coronation of the bill was much stronger and put much more of an onus on departments actually paying and buying them. I was just wondering, in terms of the consultation on the draft anti-poverty strategy, have councils, I suppose, responded strongly to that on an individual basis and a collective one as well?
As far as I'm aware, we've all responded individually to the anti-poverty strategy. I'm not sure if a collect. Yeah,
Nilga.
I did Nilga.
Nilga has submitted a response also from the elected members' perspective of local government.
Yeah, well, hopefully that will see your inclusion, because we've seen from the minister before, he's happy enough to push responsibility for many things on the councils. So your omission from this was bizarre, but you'll take the responsibility. That's for sure. You've shown you'll take responsibility, but I suppose from your perspective, it's imperative that you're adequately resourced to do so as well.
Okay, listen, thank you very much. That's been really, really useful, really helpful, a great start, and we look forward to continuing this engagement, because I think it's clear we see yourselves as central, given your feet on the ground, your local knowledge, all of that. So thank you to our first panel. That is Ronan, Patricia, Kevin and David. Thank you very much. Okay, members, so we need to take a short break then. If I can just say, members, I propose we'll take follow-up actions after all three panels rather than individually. So if members take a note of any actions like that, we'll have to take a short break in broadcasting to get the panel in, I think. So we'll ask the clerk. Members' agreement.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
The screen over because distracting me.
Is she live?
Okay, thank you everyone. So that's us resumed broadcasting after a short suspension to change over our panel. And now moving to agenda item 8, which is local councils and the anti-poverty strategy, oral evidence, panel 2. So members, the papers for this agenda item are pages 108 to 122 of your meeting pack and pages 40 to 76 of the table papers. I'd now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. So we have Ruth Allen, who is Head of Community Development in Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council. John McVeigh, who's Acting Director of Community, Mid and East Antrim. Claire Linney, who's Assistant Director of Development in Mid Ulster Council. And Andy Patterson, who's Director, Active and Healthy Communities as attendee for Newry, Mourne and North Down Council. As I did with panel 1, I'm going to invite each of you in turn to make a brief opening statement before we move to questions from members. So I propose that we go to Ruth, then John, then Claire and then Andy, in that order. And then we'll have questions from members. So just to briefly say that we're delighted to have you in. Committee has taken a keen interest in the role of council and the opportunity to work better and more collectively with councils, given your particular knowledge and input into a lot of areas, but maybe into this very important anti-poverty area in particular. So thank you for that, and go ahead please.
Thank you. Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council welcomed the publication of the draft anti-poverty strategy. It was long awaited. However, we are concerned that the draft presented falls short in ambition, in urgency and the prioritisation needed to achieve the vision of ending poverty. The strategy lists a number of strategic commitments. However, it's noted that these are largely not new, not funded, not measurable against targets and not prioritised. The focus is widely spread. A strong strategy should provide a framework for both enabling and obliging action. The lack of funding and prioritisation means that action has not been enabled, and the lack of measurable targets creates no obligation to deliver. The approach based on prevention to address root causes is in principle very positive, but we've expressed some concerns about how this has been understood and some of the assumptions that are focused on individual rather than structural factors. And we feel that distracts attention from where the responsibility and the opportunity lies in prevention of poverty. We were heartened at the vision of working together, and we agree that the size of this challenge requires that. However, the draft strategy is largely blind to the role of local delivery partners. Local councils in the third sector need to be considered equal partners by central government departments. ABC Council plays a key role in mitigating against the impact of poverty, and we're particularly anxious and conscious about the impact of cost of living pressures on families and those living with a disability. Within our borough, that's 32% of our households that have dependent children, over a quarter of whom are living in relative poverty. More than 1 in 5 in the borough have a limiting long-term health condition or disability, and with a significant disability employment gap and high levels of unpaid carers, those households are increasingly vulnerable. Community planning creates a two-way link between the programme for government and local delivery plans, and again we felt that this was missing, a missed opportunity from the plan. Its partnership includes many of those necessary to tackle poverty, including the Department for Communities. In the ABC Council area, this includes 47 partners, over 145 individuals involved in our partnership, and a strong third sector voice through our community and voluntary sector panel. Through our Tackling Poverty and Social Exclusion subcommittee, we have worked on a co-design basis to deliver the ABC Crisis Support Network and ensure that there is a strong safety net in place for local people. We've now reviewed our community plan, and the agreement was to include inclusive economy as one of our priority areas, with action plan there and a focus on ensuring that everyone has access to a decent standard of living. We're focused more on prevention and sustainable pathways out of poverty creating an inclusive economy. When it comes to ensuring alignment between local action plans and the final strategy, we are keen that the embedding of lived experience is there throughout. It was very strong in the early stages of the development of this strategy, but we know that our partners felt let down and disappointed by how that translated in the latter stages. That embedding of lived experience is how we work within Council, and it's certainly how we ensure the best alignment between the central strategies and the real issues that people are experiencing. We would like to see the co-design approach embedded across all pillars and into the monitoring both of the strategy and also the individual commitments that are there underneath the strategy to ensure a sharp focus on those root causes and make sure that people are held to account for the delivery under the plan. The actions identified within the final strategy need to be more explicit on where delivery through local councils and community partners is envisaged. Existing community planning partnerships provide a real opportunity for that and should be used as channels for coordinated action and coordinated funding on a local basis. The strategies must be resourced. The final anti-poverty strategy provides an opportunity for multi-year, multifaceted funding channelled through this partnership. The Department for Communities, as a community partner, can be there alongside us, contributing to pooled budgets, but be there as more than a funder, as shaping the delivery plan and ensuring that there is focus action in line with the strategy. Effectively targeting poverty strengthens local economic growth, it improves community cohesion, improves population health, and is evidence to generate net savings for both central and local government. As a council, we are keen to play our part as part of a shared strategic approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much, John.
Good morning, Chair and members, and thank you for the opportunity to present evidence here this morning. By way of a little bit of background, I've been in the Interim Director for Community Role in Mid and East Antrim Council since September 2025, so I've been serving in that role for the last 5 months. The brief of the role does include the community planning and within that the sort of council approach to shaping and tackling poverty strategy. However, I'm coming in really with a little bit less sort of day-to-day expertise, but what I hope to bring in the brief submission I have is coming in and just giving a different perspective on what we're doing within council and then wider within the sector, within local government. Mid and East Antrim as a borough, it demonstrates a number of characteristics which I think in the strategy would lead towards poverty risk. It has large areas of a rural setting. It's a large elements of older persons within the borough. There are substantial pockets of persons from an ethnic background, and that's particularly caused some stress points, which I may touch on the presentation in terms of the civil unrest that we had within Mid and East Antrim over the summer period last year, and the links potentially to some of the stress points around poverty, which I believe fed into that. We have problems with substance abuse, particularly in some of the urban estates within the main towns. So there's a lot of what I see in the strategy document as causes of poverty, which would be in the Mid and East Antrim borough, and it's one of our less affluent local council areas in NI, as members would probably recognise. From a point of view from our East Antrim Council perspective, we did not make a contribution as an individual council to the strategy and consultation. Now, I see that as perhaps some of the issues we have within council that are being, from a governance point of view, being addressed, but it's something that I've observed coming into the role, and neither do we have a specific anti-poverty strategy within council. So that is something, again, that I think I would welcome the strategy. I think it's given me, as someone with maybe less community background, it has helped to shape my thinking, and what I have done is sort of analyse where we are as a council. Before I touch on that, general observations, listen to the first session and speaking to colleagues who I know on the panel. Yes, I do recognise, as other members of other officers have said, that the council role it needs further definition. I would agree with that, albeit I think that the 3 pillars are a good logical way to examine developing an anti-poverty strategy, and I would support that. But the role of council, as the previous officers had indicated, is it needs to be further worked on and defined. Resourcing is a clear issue. Particularly, I think, Chair, listened to your comments at the end of the session about the emerging issues, internationally, and the undoubted pressure from both a revenue and capital element that's going to place upon councils and the wider sort of government departments. So that's something really to be very careful on, and definitely would support the idea of sort of further defining targets to deliver. Targets and outcomes, they focus attention within council, so those are very much, I would support the comments of earlier. And coordination within the local government sector. My day-to-day role is around capital delivery and regeneration, and I am aware that there are good, strong department-led structures where department, local government officials in that area come together and coordinate and work together and align. I'm not as aware of the community planning alignment piece, so I think that's a recommendation to potentially consider how councils can align with departmental and ministerial support in a coordinated way, and the strategy certainly feels that it's a step forward in that direction. Looking at the 3 pillars in terms of where I would assess our council to be currently, I think we're strong on the minimising impact. So there are examples, and it's in the evidence pack that we've put forward in terms of tackling heating and warmth issues, food, debt advice, support for families and children. I think we're particularly strong in those areas. Other areas within sort of minimising impact we want to look at that tie into what I alluded to earlier, place. There are aspects in terms of place, community infrastructure, which I think we need to look at. There is a programme that the Department for Communities are taking forward, Shaping Sustainable Places. I think that can help us in that particular area. Crime and safety and housing, those are really big issues that well, I don't want to digress into what happened over the summer. Certainly the issue of housing and safety for women and girls, safety for communities in general, those are areas we need to do more work on. Where we're less strong would be on issues around minimising risk. In my sort of 5 months looking at in the Antrim a poverty action group, I can happy to provide more evidence on that if members feel in moving forward. But that was a strong, cohesive, coordinating group which interacted with other partners in the Mid-East Antrim area. It's currently not working, and it's unfunded. Now, I was surprised at that, to learn that, and that's something that I would want to look at, certainly in while I'm still in the director role. So that's really clearly around strategy, minimising risk, and then exiting poverty. I think that's
briefly,
something
please.
as well. Yeah, strong on the economic and employment and training side, education and childcare. That's where we need to do more work, Chair.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Claire, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee. We really appreciate the engagement, and we do hope it's the first of many. I suppose I was going to start by going through the paper that I presented, and then I thought, well, I'll digress off and just answer the questions that you were presenting earlier. So from our perspective, in terms of Mid-Ulster, obviously we have all our statistics in terms of poverty, and we then have a lived experience, which we can't be a voice for. But we are a voice for 40 members who are dealing with people on the ground who are lived experience. We also have our partners, and it was referenced earlier in terms of our community sector, who are like working with people day and daily, the advice provision, the social supermarkets. So they're a voice back to us of some of the issues that have been presented, and we have tried to put those into the paper and say, these are still the key issues that we're dealing with. So that's everything from childcare, it's everything from food poverty, fuel poverty. So we know they're all there. We know that the document and the strategy is trying to address those. And I suppose from our perspective it's a responsibility of everybody, responsibility of every department, and the responsibility of how councils can link in as well. But I suppose the big factor is, where does the accountability lie? And yes, it's brilliant that the DFC are taking that accountability on. But one of the things that we would potentially ask for consideration, is there a need for an act in terms of working with the strategy? So we do want the strategy obviously delivered, and we want the strategy on the ground quite quickly, and we appreciate things take time. But this is a major issue in terms of society. It's a major issue in terms of everybody being responsible for the most vulnerable. Would an act strengthen that in terms of everybody's responsibility and give us the statutory support in terms of where that lies, and actually then setting real hard outcomes and how we all work towards these? And one of the things that we would have stated was that yes, the outcomes are very important, resources are critical, obviously, and then who's going to oversee in terms of ensuring that the resources are being delivered in an integrated fashion, because a lot of this will be about integration. And second to that is that we feel that would be important in the strategy is there are so many policies out there that actually can help alleviate poverty, and potentially that we're not having the anti-poverty view on those policies. So I don't know if that's something that the committee could do in terms of like an oversight role. Like the recent one that's just closed in terms of its consultation is a standard of housing, critical issue for Mid-Ulster. And one of the things that is not in it is actually the private sector, so the private rented, which is where most people are having to go due to the issue of provision of social housing and affordable housing, and we recognise that there's limited budgets, but in that absence we do need to have other policies that support. So I suppose there's that filter of how poverty can be dealt with across all policy areas. And I have referenced in our response in terms of the key issues, in terms of some of the things that we might be able to go further on, and I suppose it's been referenced today, the rural aspect in terms of where rural sits and some of the higher costs with regard to rural. And I know it has been referenced in terms of how we then link all the policies together, and something that we have been raising over and over is, you know, good quality jobs, dealing with childcare, but also your costs that are limiting your good quality employment, or again benefits, which is equally important, is such things as housing. If you don't have affordable housing, then obviously, and other costs that are increasing all the time, you don't have a sustainable income to live. So it's about the whole package and everybody working together to see how we can join up in terms of actually taking our actions forward, and again obviously have to be costed. One of the key issues obviously that has been referenced is where does councils sit. So as I said, we can be one of local voices. We're not saying we speak for people in poverty, but we do have 40 members that are dealing with people in poverty day and daily that actually can provide some of the issues that they're experiencing. Then obviously we would like the departments to be out on the ground, obviously engaging people and our most vulnerable. And I suppose one of the key things for us is we recognise as a council we're part of the solution in terms of programme delivery in partnership with yourselves. Obviously we have a rate base that we struggle to keep at a low level in terms of what resources we can put in, but we're happy partners in terms of being able to do some of the on-ground delivery. But more importantly, as I said, we'd like to be involved in the bigger solutions. So suppose over here we can deal with the thousands, but how do we be involved in being a partner in terms of where the millions are going? So we'd like to stay at the table and be involved in those conversations to bring some of those local concepts that we can have both regional solutions but actually localised area-based solutions. So we're happy to be involved, and we really welcome both a partner in terms of delivery but actually staying involved in terms of where the bigger solutions are going and how we can bring our members' experience on the ground into that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire. And I will just declare the interest of trustee of one of the groups probably that you're mentioning there. So just to clarify, just to make that clear as an interest. So go ahead, Andy, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that you've sat through one session this morning, and you're probably starting to pick up similar themes across all of our colleagues in council. So I'll keep it brief, Chair, and I'll just set out our position as fed back in the submission to the consultation last summer. So really within the Newry, Mourne and Down district, the issue of poverty is acute and is in effect amongst our local residents. We have the third highest number of super output areas within the top 100, most deprived areas in Northern Ireland. 23 of our 84 SOAs fall within the top 25%, most deprived, and 4 of the five highest ranked areas in Northern Ireland for income deprivation are within our district. So I think given the pressures and the acute need to address these challenges, Newry, Mourne and Down Council, District Council welcomes the overall vision set out in the strategy. However, and I think this is touching on themes that have been raised by others, greater clarity is required in terms of how cross-sector collaboration can be operationalised. The distinct role of central government, local government, and particularly the community voluntary sector, how they feature in the strategy, because I think that has been a major issue, and certainly that's something that we're picking up from our CV partners who sit with us on our Community Plan and Partnership Board. In terms of measurable outcomes and accountability, again this has been raised, but we really need measurable indicators and clear timeframes for delivery. They need to be time bound, and a budget really needs to be ring fenced for the delivery of the strategy. In terms of addressing rural poverty, and that's a particular issue within our district, given really 1 in 3 people in poverty live in rural areas, the strategy should include a distinct rural poverty outcome. Rural poverty is often hidden, linked to transport barriers, associated with digital exclusion, and connected to higher service costs for accessing the same services for residents in urban areas. So these inequalities must be explicitly acknowledged and addressed. In terms of advice services, the recognition of the advice services is welcomed within the strategy. They're really essential we find in our district in terms of support and benefit uptake, navigating welfare reform, reducing debt, preventing homelessness, and maximising household income. So it's really important that they're sustainable and there's adequate funding across multiple years provided to the services that provide the advice to local residents. In terms of programme integration, really there needs to be more around how the strategy integrates across departments, I think, centrally, but then how it ties in with local delivery plans. And also community plan has been mentioned a few times, I think also, Chair. So in terms of, there's some local interventions I'd like to highlight, and maybe I'll give, they'll come out in the questions from yourselves in terms of a wee bit more detail, but I've mentioned community advice services. Social supermarkets operate within our district, and they really provide an essential service, not just food banks, but to provide wraparound services and advice to people coming in to build the capacity of service users that they can go on and get employment or live sustainably. So those are really important. And then the multi-agency approach, community plan, as I said again, we'll go into that in more detail. So I suppose in conclusion, really to maximise impact and avoid duplication, it's essential that a legislative or structural accountability framework is set up in line with the strategy. The need for ring-fence multi-year funding is essential. The clearly defined roles of council and community planning partners, embedded measurable targets within the strategy, a distinct focus on rural poverty, the sustainable funding of the community and voluntary sector, and then, as I said, recognising the importance of wraparound services. And really, I suppose, Chair, and it has been mentioned, community planning partners bring together central government partners, CV sector, council colleagues, and then others from across government in terms of ALB. So happy to take questions.
Yep, thank you very much. Appreciate all of those. I'm going first of all to our Deputy Chair, Cathy Mason. Go ahead, Cathy, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I am going to be slightly parochial today and asking Andy possibly a number of questions. And as a previous councillor that has worked with you before, Andy, I know that within Newry, Mourne and Down you mentioned the high volumes of poverty that we do have, and in real pockets of areas as well. And we've heard it mentioned here that it's not actually a statutory function of the council, but I've seen time and again how the council has stepped forward and kind of inherited this by default, and the community voluntary sector, especially in Newry, Mourne and Down, are just fantastic, and I know that the council has strong links with those. Could you just expand on that maybe slightly more and give us an idea of, you know, the value that they're actually bringing to these communities? I know you mentioned the social supermarkets there. I know we have strong links with CERC and the skills academies and stuff like that as well, just for those gaps.
Absolutely. Through the Chair, I think it's vitally important to highlight, you know, community planning has been talked about a lot this morning, but amongst the community planning structure, we've got what we call a strategic stakeholder forum of the community voluntary sector. That's made up entirely of CV sector organisations within our district. Having a voice, their voice at the table with regards to community planning is essential. They work day in, daily with people who are affected by poverty. They know the local areas. They're able to deliver interventions on the ground immediately. You know, even in the likes of Storm AO in last year, we worked very much in close partnership with our strategic stakeholder forum of community voluntary partners to deliver hardship funding or to deliver interventions in the immediacy after the storm. That's the same with COVID, that we were able to work very closely with our partners. And then the likes of social supermarkets, that again is delivered through partners in the SSF forum. So I think it's essential that they have a voice at the table. Community planning partnership boards are their voice, essentially. And we would very much support their continued involvement in the co-design of the action plans of this strategy and then what the outcomes should be following that.
Thank you. I suppose everything you mentioned there, one name always rings true to me is Nicholas McCrickard in the County Down Rural Community Network as well. I'm glad you mentioned COVID there because I think that's when it came to the fore, especially within the council. I just want to pick up on another thing that a couple of, Claire yourself mentioned as well, around the rural poverty. And again, Andy, sorry for being parochial, but we do have real pockets of rural areas, I suppose, around Slave Crib, the Mournes and the Lakale area as well. Do you believe that this anti-poverty strategy is going to, is going to sufficiently tackle that rural poverty and those challenges that you mentioned as well, of like those who are struggling with cost of living who are in those rural areas?
I would say, Chair, and from the feedback from Council, but also from our CV partners, there's a lot more that can be done in terms of tackling rural poverty within the strategy. One example, and you've mentioned Nicholas in County Down Rural Community Network. You know, we were able to provide funding through. It was actually Westminster funding through to Nicholas, and the purchase of two buses. It may sound fairly simple, but there was thousands of people positively impacted through the provision of two new buses to that network. There's you know, and reducing that social isolation and being able to deliver services and transport people. It'll be the same with colleagues in other rural areas. That's a real and meaningful impact, and that's something. It's those types of interventions that come along, and Council is able to put them into practice through our partners in the CV sector. But there needs to be maybe a strategic approach to how those interventions are created and delivered out into the community.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks,
Chair. Pam, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your attendance today. Really important topic. You've already mentioned resources being critical, and I've heard there about the importance of ring fencing of monies within the multi-year budget. And obviously, at the moment, there's no mention of anti-poverty in the draft budget by John O'Dowd. So maybe your comments around that and the importance of that, and how also, I suppose, relating to that draft budget as well, the ask that we've made as a committee to the executive to prioritise housing, to ensure that we do meet those social housing targets. If you have any comments around that, because clearly, you know, we've heard, especially recently in the last week or so, about the rising costs and those fuel costs, those heating costs. They're, you know, they very quickly become very unaffordable. And clearly, if we can build better housing of a much better standard, that, you know, reduces the risk of people falling into those fuel poverty needs as well. So if you have any comments around any of those issues.
The housing one?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Clara.
I was just going to take the housing one is it's a massive issue for us. Massive issue in terms of housing need, massive issue in terms of the rent and what people are having to pay, and then what they can live on is colossal. And then the third area for us is obviously quality of the housing. So as I referenced earlier, you know, there is that element of how we ensure that all the policies that are coming through have that anti-poverty filter on them, you know, that we can actually support through policy, and maybe it's not always money. In terms of your
comment in terms of the social housing. We have been trying to work very closely, obviously, with the Housing Executive and the associations to try and lobby for the housing, to get more social housing in, because the lack of social housing is causing a major issue in terms of the rents going up and real issues in terms of poverty. But we're also finding an issue now that's coming to the fore in terms of working poor and how they're actually getting supported. And we're finding a lot of young people in our areas are actually moving out of our towns because they can't actually afford any of the housing because it's going straight to private landlords. And it's how we get back into that affordability. And we did appreciate the complete intermediate rent discussion that is starting to take place and the pilots that are happening. And I suppose one of the things that we're keen to do as a council is to get more involved in that, and it could be from different partnerships. From, is it potential land assets that we can partner with government on? Is it actually getting involved in regeneration and how regeneration supports the whole housing? And then the third one is even in terms of where actually we can actually look within the planning in terms of the mixed tenure, and also within actually zoning areas that we can actually support that both a social, and we're now finding the affordable is equally as important. So that's something that definitely I think should sit within the plan. And we had lobbied at the start when it was first coming out, the different drafts, that the housing has to sit centrally within an anti-poverty strategy, so we would welcome that.
I would just echo the observations that Claire has made. So it's sort of actually sitting across the table, all four of our council, all of us from an area that has both the rural dynamic and the housing issues across us as well. I mean, in terms of access to affordable housing, definitely it's been identified as a cause of potential poverty. Homelessness is an aspect of that. But we do work well, again, as Claire has said, with our housing executive partners. They're very helpful in terms of supply of stock. Regeneration is definitely an area I think that there's opportunities in that place solution. So community infrastructure, investment in towns, really, where there are poverty black spots, and in terms of another dynamic in terms of the rural bit with housing as well is connectivity. So we've managed to be successful to secure funding through Peace Plus for smart towns and villages. So that's particularly aimed at our rural villages within East Antrim, and access to new facilities, facility improvements, technology, and it's connecting our isolated rural communities as well. The point I would just make about that, though, that was an application for funding through Peace Plus. We had to actively go and seek that. So maybe picking up the point about budget, is there something where councils can access that directly in an equitable way? We had to effectively compete against our other council partners. So I'm not sure that that's, while we welcome the funding and we'll put it to good use, I'm not sure that's the best vehicle to actually address poverty in a competition sense. Can we look at funding to sort of rise the tide across all of our local councils?
Thank you. Go ahead, Ruth.
Just an observation, but in the strategy, the draft strategy, if you look at the middle pillar, the mitigations against poverty, that's where we have, at the moment, most of the commitments. There is comparatively little on the prevention side and the creating pathways out of poverty. If we continue to just mitigate against the impacts of poverty without getting upstream and putting the investment in things like housing and transport that impact what happens and what's the money that's in people's pockets. If we don't be doing that, then we will constantly have a drain. This is where the evidence about the investment, where it can go and how it can reduce the cost to our societies of poverty, really needs to be that focus on all of the actions, looking at the evidence there about the financial return from that kind of investment.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Pam. Kelly, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentations, and to Andy, I know I did two of your DEAs. I'm just wondering, we've spoken, and some of you have heard the presentation earlier from other councillors, the labour market partnership work that you're currently working very hard with, each of you. My ask is, when we think about Northern Ireland as a whole, it's not one size fits all. Your councils cover different areas and have different levels of poverty within those areas. But I'm just wondering, has there been any information through from central government that could help to think about poverty, think about this broader concept, about the Northern Ireland skills gaps that are missing rather than just local skills gaps, because I'm very aware, for instance, I know Armagh has just talked about, and yourselves have made Mid-East Antrim, about technology and about other alternatives, which mean that someone could be working from home, but they could be working for a company anywhere. Has there been any central government, I'm trying to think of this poverty, if we don't have a central lead on this, do we have a central lead elsewhere, for instance on the skills gap, on identifying the type of skills that they need you to push? Is there anything come from central government on that type of thing?
We along with probably partners around the table, Mid-East Antrim's part of, for example, the Belfast Regional City Deal. A lot of those strategic projects are geared towards advancement in technology, skills, making sort of employment ready, higher education. So there's strong linkages there. The labour market partnership, yes, that was a previous contributors touched on. We have that within council, and so it's definitely in the exiting poverty side. That's where I think we would be stronger. So I think local councils generally have got a strong economic development strategy, and there's that sort of linkage with higher education and employment. I think that's where we would, if I was being honest, I think that's where we would have some successes. Where I think we would be struggling more, a little bit higher linkage with education. I think definitely that's an opportunity. We've touched on the housing side as well, and I think sort of maybe moving a little bit away from your question, so I'll finish. But really on the, I think on the public safety element, that's definitely sort of having a secure. Part of our corporate objective is a safe place. And a place that's welcoming within Mid-East Antrim, people want to come and dwell in. That's definitely an aspect. So working with other sort of, and in the aftermath of the events of last year, dealing with people that have been through the justice system and moving out of that, and then maybe they're trapped because of experiences that have had to have a police intervention. So I think there's a community safety police aspect as well that we need to link into that as well.
I'm trying to sort of tease out where there's any activity currently within central government, so the Northern Ireland Assembly, out to councils. We're saying that the anti-poverty work needs to have that linkages and needs to have that leadership. Is there any other evidence of any other way?
If I could, Chair, certainly with our Community Plan and Partnership Board, we have DFC sitting at the table. We have got we just Invest in I are another partner there. We discuss the local economic plans and the development of that, how that integrates with our own strategies and with centrally. We talk about LMPs, we talk about skills gaps with the regional colleges. We've got the Health Trust there. So as a model, that is a fantastic way to get the information from central, but to make it local. And also our CV partners, they're often, the likes of Nicholas, sits at the table when it comes to the development of the LEP, for example, has been involved in the area integrated partnership boards from a health perspective, but also now the new neighbourhood model coming through. So it is that ability to bring all of that information together, discuss it, plot a path, an action plan, and then deliver it from a local perspective. So I appreciate it's been emphasised with other partners this morning and now, but really I can't emphasise enough how the Community Plan and Partnership Board at each level is essential, I think, in terms of the delivery of strategies like these.
My final question, just very quickly, Chair, which is something that really confused me, because whenever the anti-poverty strategy came out, all of you had an opportunity to respond to the consultation, but none of you seem to have been involved by DFC at an earlier stage, at the co-production stage. Is that frustrating for you?
Certainly, I think there were some very good in the initial stages of the development, very good efforts in terms of bringing in the experience of those in the front line, and that gap in terms of the communication and the focus that we could bring wasn't there. This hasn't become a whole system approach, and it needs to be a whole system approach. When the strategy was first launched, we invited the Department down to do a consultation session with us. And that was definitely the feeling from the room within the Tackling Poverty and Social Exclusion subcommittee that I co-chair. And that aspiration for it to give a driving focus for all of our work And that certainly, there is an appetite, there is an energy, and there is an urgency within community, within statutory partners at all levels. And this is a real opportunity to pull that, harness that energy together. We would like to see that strengthened going forward. So yes, that continued conversation and dialogue has to be a key part of this in a co-design approach.
Yep. Thank you, Shelley. Morris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be brief. It's coming through quite clear that the councils are going to be the main delivery for the anti-poverty strategy. But do you think you are being resourced enough by the executive to carry out that function if and when it comes? And do you think there's enough coordination to identify a lead organisation to make sure there's accountability and there's measurable outcomes?
I suppose one of the things that from our council would say is, because the whole poverty is so systemic, programmes will have a key element, and obviously, there will be local delivery, but there's obviously how every partner, all government departments, and that's one of the things that we were saying earlier about, potential for an act, because it's all right doing the programmes, but if we don't get to some of the major departments in terms of how things are being delivered, how, like housing, like health, like education, and really getting to the core of education to lift people out of poverty. So that's the key. So it's very much about the policy, it's very much about the mainstream delivery and how it can be either uplifted, tailored or supported to actually recognise that there is severe poverty. And then alongside that, I would say some of the more programme level, but they all have to work together, because the programme level on its own will never, it'll just keep doing what we're doing. So we have to actually go for the real hard issues in terms of what's creating the poverty, and that's obviously something we say that whilst we mightn't be the delivery element on that, it's how we can bring some influence or bring some information to the table that would help the discussion in terms of those big projects, in terms of how we're going to, or big delivery in terms of how we're going to take it forward, big policy changes, that type of thing.
Thank you. Very briefly.
Sorry, Chair, just to reference in terms of resource and particularly budget, it's not necessarily a question of new budget, because there's a lot of interventions and programmes that are already being delivered. I think the challenge is, if you look at it from an outcomes-based approach, I'm not quite sure if the outcomes have been looked at and then a mapping exercise, and I think one of my colleagues in the previous session talked about a mapping exercise of what's actually being delivered to address and tackle poverty by the programmes that are out there. We would know in the CV sector, a lot of our partners there are running every year, trying to get funding, go through application processes, scoring processes. They mightn't get letters of offer or contracts for funding late in the year, and they have to deliver by the end of the financial year, which is just not sustainable. These organisations don't have a lot of resource themselves, they don't have a lot of people, and I think it's vastly unfair that the onus is put on them to try and chase funding, whereas if it was maybe more strategic and we could work together, I think it would be more sustainable from a resource, budget and people perspective. So that's something that certainly our council would strongly advocate for, to have that approach. New funding, I think, is required also, and there can't be responsibilities pushed out to organisations, because I really do think it's a partnership approach. But the CV sector are suffering when it comes to chasing budgets and funding all the time.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just a comment first of all, and then I have a final question for the panel. The comments around the bus issue, which you mentioned, as it may seem a small issue, absolutely fundamental. Mm-hmm. Just transport in general, cutting across a lot of what we're discussing, and the bus is a really good example, because it's not only an anti-poverty measure, it's a health outcomes, and will improve and will save money in health outcomes. It addresses that social isolation. It's an equality matter when it comes to rural areas, and it also fits with regional balance. So it's just so fundamental. It's frustrating how many times we've had to defend community transport in the executive. It should be the last thing to be cut, never mind the first. The question that I wanted to ask was, and the committee have had concerns and expressed very clear concerns, and it is important to state the Department for Communities are the lead department in bringing forward this strategy that we are working on today. And the engagement and the co-production element of it, we have had concerns about how that has developed over the course of this mandate. I have to say, for me, co-production has huge value and it is value rather than ticking a box. Not only can those co-production partners help to identify the destination, they can help to navigate a course to that destination, and they can help to trim the tiller while the journey is ongoing. So in that sense, it shouldn't be an event. It should be an iterative and a reiterative process right throughout, because of the value it contains for departments, for government. So in terms of the lived experience, what standing structures will embed lived experience in design and monitoring beyond the consultation process? I think, Ruth, you have touched on this a couple of times, so I'll maybe come to you for that.
How that will be embedded within our own council?
And ideas for wider government, but both, please, if you may.
Well, I'll give the example, start with where we work and how we work within council. In the Tackling Social Exclusion Subcommittee that I chair that alongside Martin Stevenson from the Salvation Army, Chris Leach, who's chair of our ABC Food Hub and involved in the Manual Church. They are key there in our crisis support network. They are my constant guide and the constant check on all our decisions, how we shape our action plan, challenging our discussions, challenging our thinking, and keeping us focused. And it's the regular just reiterating, saying, this man came into me today, and explaining the story, about explaining what a £20 debt can mean to someone who borrows from a family member, and then the relationship breakdown, and that is their safety net, and then borrows from a friend, breaks that down, becomes socially isolated. That's £20. And those kind of stories keep your focus on how significant this is in terms of people's experience, how the persistent poverty affecting people over years means that we can create pathways, but people can't start on those pathways because there is so much damage that has been done to them as a person, and that well-being support to rebuild the resilience of the person has to start before we create the pathways out of poverty. So that has to be embedded. I would have suggested that it's embedded not just in the discussions for developing the action plan, the support for this strategy, but it has to be within the monitoring and evaluation of the individual strategies, the commitments that are underneath this, because otherwise that focus on poverty will easily be lost. Department for Communities has that focus very much at its heart. Not all will have, and it depends who you're working with, but if you are working alongside people with lived experience, they keep that sharp. So that has to be an embedded part. And I know, coming from a health service background, personal and public involvement is a statutory duty. That duty to listen and to work alongside, nothing about you without you, was one of our mantras, and that has to be part of this work with poverty, that we can't do it without that experience guiding and keeping us focused in terms of how we carry it through. And we know that is how our community and voluntary sector partners work. And if I may pick up on a comment that was made earlier, our community advice services brought in over £3.5 million in unclaimed benefits to our economy last year. But the staff within those advice services are being put in redundancy notice. They're having to say that the level at which they're being paid, the insecurity of their employment, has meant they lost staff. We cannot be working equally alongside our partners if we are not respecting them and we are not putting into practice in the whole process at every step of the way that understanding of what it means to make sure that everyone has a decent standard of living.
Thank you.
Just a really brief, and there's some points that have been made today that I think are really, really enlightening actually, and it's brilliant to hear them directly from local council. I just want to pick up on something you said, Claire, around the education piece, and Ruth, you mentioned as well about there being missed opportunities here. We've heard previously about that fourth pillar probably being missing around prevention. Claire, just because you mentioned it around that education, lifting people out of poverty, do you believe that that's something that should be within this strategy, and there should be more, I suppose, working across all departments, but specifically if we're going to tackle prevention within education?
That's something that we had responded on, about how everybody was responsible, like including councils, but every department is responsible for our most vulnerable. And I suppose one of the things is you can do all the prevention stuff and you can try and go in and, we do programmes, and they're all important, everything's important, but if we don't get to the key root of what is causing it, we're just going to keep doing it over and over again. So I suppose that's when I kept saying, going back to every policy, how do you take every policy and do an anti-poverty stream of the policy, that we're ensuring that we're targeting it in the right way, that we're getting to the most vulnerable? How do we ensure that every programme we deliver, every service that we put out, we do that anti-poverty check to make sure that we're getting it and we can uplift it or we can tailor it? And I suppose it's what was said earlier about the equality. Sometimes equality goes, we just do the same thing for everybody. But sometimes you have to actually target, and sometimes you have to go the extra mile to get those most vulnerable. And one of the key areas that we believe is in terms of education. If you can get, young people in, give them, and we have a great education system, so we're very lucky, but there is still some fall through it. How do we catch them? How do we do we do have some good neighbourhood renewal programmes that are catching, young people in terms of that area-based learning approach, family centres, but also looking at maybe young people that are coming through with intergenerational issues, that the whole mental health, can they actually be able to sustain themselves in education? So it's that whole integrated approach where does health sit alongside education, and there's no one department can operate on its own anymore. Every single thing impacts on another, and one of the things that even we would say is the school cost.
Okay, listen, thank you very, very much. That's been really useful. I have to say, a real strong sense across both panels of people who are knowledgeable, committed and keen to be more involved. And I think that's a real opportunity, as well as something clearly to flag. So thank you very much for that, and I appreciate your attendance today. Thank each of you.
Thanks, Chair, members.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we do need to take a short break to get the next panel in, but I've suggested we also take a quick comfort break at this stage, so we could take a 5 or 6 minute break. We'll get the next panel in and we'll get broadcasting going. But can I ask the clerk to take us out of broadcasting now to get the panel into place?
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Environment open.
Thank you. Okay, members, so that's us resuming our meeting at agenda item 9. And this is the Local Councils and Anti-Poverty Strategy Oral Evidence, and this is panel 3. So members, the papers for the agenda item are pages 124 to 164 of the meeting pack and pages 78 to 120 of the table papers. So I'd now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. We have Julie Welch, Head of Service for Community and Culture in Causeway Coast and Glens Borough Council, Una McGillian, who's Director of Legacy in Strabane and Derry District Council, and John Boyle, who is Director for Community and Wellbeing in Fermanagh and Omagh District Council. So as with previous panels, I'm going to invite each of you in turn to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. So I'm proposing that we go to yourself, Julie, first, then to Una, and then to John, and then we'll get to members' questions. So thank you, Julie. Go ahead.
Thank you. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak on the anti-poverty strategy. Causeway Coast and Glens welcomes the strategy and supports its vision. By working together, poverty and its impacts can be eradicated across our communities. It is ambitious and aspirational. Its successes, however, depends on genuine commitment from all partners, clear accountability and adequate resourcing. Currently, the role of local government is not sufficiently defined. Greater clarity is needed on how councils will link with departments and how delivery can be coordinated. Our borough has over 140,000 residents, many in dispersed rural settlements. Poverty is complex here. Employment is often seasonal, with low wage or part-time, particularly in tourism, hospitality, agriculture and retail. Fuel poverty is high due to the rural housing stock and energy costs. Housing stress and homelessness presentations are rising, including among working households. In coastal and rural areas, second homes and short-term lets exacerbate affordability pressures. Council is actively mitigating poverty through multi-agency partnerships, advice services, fuel support, community food initiatives, skills programmes and regeneration planning. These interventions generate tangible benefits, but short-term funding and limited statutory levers constrain the impact. We feel the Council can strengthen, or the strategy can strengthen local outcomes in 4 key areas. Firstly, employment and income quality, promoting fair work, year-round skills and sector-specific workforce planning to reduce reliance on emergency support. Secondly, rural disadvantage and fuel poverty, addressing transport, energy and service access barriers with targeted interventions. Thirdly, housing affordability and stress. This is a big issue in our council area. Aligning social housing supply, supporting innovative delivery models and integrating housing with regeneration and planning. And preventative community structure, ensuring advice hubs and income maximisation programmes are sustainably funded to reduce debt, homelessness risk and family instability, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of that this morning already. We also highlight the need for targeted measures on childcare, older residents and community and voluntary sector resilience. Place-based interventions are critical, particularly in rural areas, and economic levers such as local industrial strategies, procurement policies and tourism job resilience remain underdeveloped. Finally, delivery timescales are a concern. With only a number of months of the current Assembly mandate remaining, urgent progress on action planning indicators and ring-fenced resourcing is essential to ensure the strategy does not fall short of its ambition. In summary, Causeway Coast and Glens supports the strategy vision. Our role is to deliver locally, but successes will depend on the clarity in relation to local government's role, measurable and detailed outcomes and indicators, sustainable resourcing and genuine partnership. We are ready to work with the Executive and this committee to ensure that the strategy achieves meaningful, lasting impact within the borough and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julie and Una, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the committee, for the invitation to be here today. As you know, I'm Una McGillian and I work with Derry City and Strabane District Council, and over the next few minutes I want to give you a bit of an overview of the types of work that we've been involved with over the inception of the Council's formation. And prior to that, I just want to say, because you'll have already received copies of our response to the strategy, that our Council was disappointed with the strategy and submitted quite a detailed response. And the reason why we were disappointed was because we felt it was long awaited and there was great expectations for what it would have contained. And we'd worked very extensively with people, support organisations in the community, and they too had that expectation that the strategy was going to deliver on key actions that they had identified. So we feel that this is a major opportunity and an opportunity not to be missed, that you can still do something with it. We think it's fantastic that there's a document there, that there's an opportunity now to build on it, and that's what our message is to really take forward the opportunity that presents. So since the inception of Derry City and Strabane District Council, we have acted with intent. And the reason why I say that is that from the very formation back in 2014 in the transition format, we decided that we were going to be a living wage employer, that every employee and every contract employee would receive the real living wage. And it has developed on since then. I've got lots of examples of the types of things that we do over and above our day-to-day activities around community, economic development and regeneration, where we've actively sought opportunities to do things differently. So with Belfast City Council, we co-financed the study into the Universal Basic Income report to see was that a feasible option and could that be implemented in Northern Ireland. In 2020, we took forward the introduction of reduced access for older people over 65 to access our leisure centres, again thinking about the health implications and how that might help people. And then in 2022 it really was the cascade of a lot of interventions around the cost of living crisis, warm spaces and types of things that we could do within the remit of our council policy and resources. But it's not just around the activities we do. There's a lot of lobbying and advocacy that the council has undertaken. It's had a lot of motions, particularly around zero-hour contracts and calling for the mitigations to be made permanent in terms of welfare reform, really supporting the Cliff Edge Coalition. We also strongly believe in affordable childcare, the implementation of the Essentials Guarantee and universal free school meals for all children. And then whenever 2020 hit the COVID pandemic, and as I say, we've been doing different bits and pieces, but it was the reality in terms of the level of need that really came to the fore for us. So whilst we were delivering food parcels and you were starting to see the vulnerability of people, that you actually realised that it was more than just food parcels, it was all the other support that they required. And we decided that we would do a piece of work because up until that stage all we ever looked at was deprivation indicators, and we started to look then at the vulnerability index, and we looked at the correlations between ill health and poverty. And that's whenever our elected members said, look, we really need to do something about this. And it was a unified voice. Every political party, every individual elected member said, we have to make a difference and we have to do whatever we can. And that's complex for a local government perspective because we don't have the vires that government would have, we don't have the finances and we don't have the policy. So a lot of the type of interventions that we were looking to do were more around the mitigations as opposed to really getting to the deep root causes of poverty. But we really earnestly was calling on the executive at that stage to develop the anti-poverty strategy because we seen that as the strategic intervention that was going to be really, really important. And from 2021, we put in 330,000 ourselves into hardship programmes, and we also administered quite a bit of money from government, particularly from DFC. And one of the things I would say is that we only ever felt that we were touching the surface of the need. We had a £100 discretionary emergency fuel programme. We opened it at 10 o'clock in the morning. By 5 o'clock that evening we closed the programme with 5,500 referrals for 2,400. That's only how many households that we could assist. And each programme that we developed in terms of intervention, we became much more targeted, and particularly people with lived experience started to say, look, that's all very well, but this is what you need to focus on. This is where it would make a real difference to us. So as every programme developed, we became more in tune with what communities were saying to us and what people with lived experience were saying. And we're really proud of the interventions that we've done. We could do a lot more, but we're obviously affected by budget. But that really brought us to the stage then of recognising, look, one-off interventions, albeit they bring relief, important, they're not the cure to what we need to do. So we said that we would develop an anti-poverty action plan, and we developed it recognising that we didn't have the Northern Ireland strategy, but government departments were very helpful to us. DFC were very active in terms of those discussions and participating in our focus groups, as were Department of Justice, and we had Department of Education and the Western Health and Social Care Trust. So it meant that the interventions that were coming forward, we could see the strategic alignment with what was potentially happening at a government level. And now that we do have an action plan, and again, it's been a key learning journey for us, because the things that we have identified, we can start to see how we need to make them more refined, and like, what does a free school day mean? So we've taken that to one side. We're asking the community, alongside people with lived experience, for them to develop that up. What would the deliverables look like? And our partnership has been incredible. Like, none of these programmes would have been delivered without the community and voluntary sector and their armies of volunteers. It wouldn't be possible. And I know previously you heard some of the discussions around, not knowing whether they were going to get funding. and in that climate it's been very, very challenging for them. But we've now seen some really significant progress in terms of the action plan. Council has ring-fenced budget itself through its rates process, and we've also now secured £300,000 through the Foyle Network Foundation Pride in Place funding for an Equality Truth Coalition. So that's where you can start to see where people can get involved and actually direct where the programme should go. So our ask of you is to be brave, be compassionate, and be the change makers to deliver positive impacts for people who are in poverty or who are at risk of poverty. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Una. Much appreciated. John, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity today. I suppose dealing with the issue of poverty in Fermanagh and Omagh district has been a priority for members, especially since 2022, and that's because it is an increasing area of concern within our district. The most recent Northern Ireland Poverty and Income Inequality report has stated that 22% of our population are living in relative poverty. 22%. 28% of our children are living in relative poverty. That's over a quarter of the children of our district are living in poverty. And a recent report, Marie Curie produced a recent report, and members are aware it's on the internet, of those who are dying in poverty. 22% of the population of people who are in their last year of life in our district are dying in poverty, and they can't afford to heat their homes, they can't afford the proper food or whatever, which exacerbates the problems that they have. And I suppose that is an indictment maybe about where we as a council, where we all in the public service have effectively failed, to address the issue of poverty. And I suppose for Fermanagh and Omagh district, those stats are up there. The worst are up there, certainly in the top 2-3 in Northern Ireland. And why is that? Maybe because we are the most rural district, and I've listened to some of this morning's proceedings, and we talk about rural poverty. We are the most rural district in Northern Ireland, and that brings challenges in relation to poverty. The transport links and the infrastructure links that we have that doesn't allow business to be at the same level as in other districts. The fewer employment opportunities, the digital exclusion, the remoteness and the associated costs that is associated with remoteness. All of those add to the poverty of our resident population. So I suppose from a Fermanagh and Omagh District Council point of view, what do we do? And in 2022, members decided this was a priority, so we appointed an anti-poverty officer. And from that, we established, or we developed an anti-poverty strategy for the district. Now, this was in advance of any draft strategy from the executive. And I've heard this morning talk about pathways out of poverty. That is exactly what our poverty is called, pathways out of poverty. And I have a copy for members here, for everyone in the audience, I suppose. In effect, there are 3 teams, and largely in line with what the regional strategy, the draft regional strategy. One, in the short term, is mitigating the effects of poverty in our district. The second one, in medium term and long term, is the prevention and the reduction of poverty. And the third one, the design and the delivery of services and supports that we have within our district. Linked to that then, about what actions are actually happening on the ground. In this current year, the council, out of its own resources, have allocated over £370,000 to dealing with poverty across the district. And dealing with cost of living support. And that is dealing support for the likes of St Vincent de Paul, for the family support hubs, and that is even separate from the money that we provide to our independent advice services. We have an intensive programme, a Fermanagh and Omagh support programme called the RAP programme, in which very intensive, where we will take 300 families, handhold them through the issues that they're experiencing. Referrals come from various different agencies across the district, and indeed from the personnel themselves, where the whole approach to, whether it be for benefits, whether it be for immediate support, whether it be for helping with job applications or whatever, where families are taken out of that. Those 300 families are only touching the iceberg, I have to say. Those are the people who are actually on their knees. There are people who are on their hunkers, who will be on their knees this time next year, who will require that support. So the need is there, but the outcomes of that, but it's a very intensive programme and a very expensive programme in order to run. And I have, as part of the briefing, I have provided a real living experience of one of those people who went through that programme in the last year. We have, and one thing I would say about the executive, about poverty proofing, we have started poverty proofing within our district. We talk about rural proofing, we talk about Section 75 proofing. Maybe there is a need for poverty proofing everything that we do within the public sector. To look at our policies, our procedures, our actions, and see how does it fit with the poverty agenda, because it is such a critical issue. With regard to the regional strategy, we certainly welcome the work that has been done on the strategy and the interaction that has taken place with many of the organisations who have been working on poverty for the last 20 years or whatever, who fed into the regional strategy. As we do now, I suppose we are slightly disappointed. And it doesn't adequately address, I don't think, the issue of rural poverty, and the regional imbalance. And the unique challenges that rural communities present with regard to poverty. I don't think it addresses the structural causes of poverty, many of which I have to say are beyond the local mitigation. Structural deficiencies in social security, issues with housing, which I know has already been discussed, the lack of the regional childcare strategy, deficits in the transport infrastructure, which is vital for us as a district, the cost of a school day, and so on and so forth. And I know it has been spoken about before, the lack of measurable outcomes and targets in relation to it. There is a whole government approach because of that is required. It's not just with Department for Communities, but it's not just executive departments, it is local. It is at a local level, and I suppose part of the disappointing thing is the lack of involvement of local councils in the development of the strategy itself. And I know it has been spoken about this morning already, about the community planning structures that are in place at a local level, that where all the partners are sitting around the table and can inform and can, that those lived examples can come to very pertinent place in development of a regional strategy. So I suppose what I would urge is that the community planning structures be used more effectively in the development and in finalisation of a strategy. And finally, Chair, that the local government has delivered and continues to deliver, I suppose, with government departments. We've seen COVID support, the DFC hardship fund, and the rollout of debt advice, all of that. There is a proven track record there of local councils, but it will require funding. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, and I very much welcome that, all those contributions. I think across all the panels we have seen a very clear evidence of where councils are actually leading the way in terms of even as well providing resource, and I think that's very welcome and indicative of the central role that we kind of as a committee have considered, and why we've put this day together and devoted this day, because we do value and recognise the role that councils can bring to this. I think picking up on your point at the start there, in relation to the role not being sufficiently defined, and I wonder, do councils generally feel that they are genuine strategic partners in shaping anti-poverty policy, or primarily seen maybe more as delivery partners? And in that sense, what would you like to see in a new strategy that would include councils more centrally and more fundamentally?
I think while we do have a role, we have a very positive relationship with the department, and we've been, as a department, you've provided many interventions that we could deliver, particularly around COVID. I think, I know you talked about that and some of the outworkings of that, and the longer term projects or initiatives that we have in place, the likes of advice services as one and social supermarkets are the other. I think what we'd like to see from feedback from my colleagues is recognition, I suppose, in terms of the impact that councils can have, or the contribution that councils can have in relation to economic development and the importance of the local economic partnerships. Housing is a big issue for our council. There's been a lot of lobbying. So in relation to having a stronger relationship with the department, and again with the housing executive strategy, we welcome that. But in terms of local planning and powers potentially to reflect on second homes, short-term lets. So I think we would like to, it's our borough suffers because we are a tourism area and we've low wage economy. So in relation, I think we would like to have a greater input in terms of working with the department on skills-based training, something that reflects the needs, I think, the needs of the labour market more effectively, because it's our low wage seasonal employment. But I suppose from my perspective in my area of work, we are engaged with the department on the review for advice services. For us, we would like to have a more strategic input into that, because reflections from my colleagues would intimate at this point that it's really quite operational in terms of what it would look like, and I think we need to have a greater input into shaping something a bit more robust in relation to that. So I think councils are uniquely placed because, as you said before, we know we're aware of the issues on the ground. We work very closely with advice services, as an example, and our local community and voluntary sector, and we would obviously welcome a greater partnership, but we need to involve not only ourselves as councils but our strategic partners, both in community planning partnerships but in other partnerships as well.
Thank you. And then I suppose one of the issues I picked up from you, John, was around that, and from many of the speakers, around the structural issues and the systemic issues. And I think it's really important. And I was a bit concerned, I have to say, on the day of the launch of the consultation when the Minister referred to giving people the tools to get themselves out of poverty. Because if the barrier is a wall, and a systemic wall, then you don't need a hammer. What you need is a doorway. And the doorway is our responsibility collectively to provide that doorway for people. I'm also keen in terms of the prevention, and I think that's a useful focus in terms of your Fermanagh and Omagh District Council approach, with mitigation, then prevention, and then delivery. I think that's quite a useful format. But in your terms, what would we need to see in an enhanced strategy document that would tackle those structural issues, or begin to tackle?
I think what we have at the minute, what we are doing at the local council level is very much firefighting. I think the structural issues are longer term in nature, and I think what we need is we always talk about joined up government and how we do business and everything like that. I think on this issue, I don't see the effectiveness of joined up government, in dealing with poverty issues. The issues of housing, of social housing. We've seen recently proposals coming out to improve for social housing. What about the private sector market? There is nothing there. The lack of a regional childcare strategy, and particularly, and I've said this, the lack of infrastructure, road infrastructure, whatever, in the Fermanagh and Omagh district. There doesn't seem to be that joined upness. And when I talk about poverty proofing, I think all of those strategies, everything should go through a poverty proofing exercise in the same way as we are legally responsible for undertaking a rural proofing exercise. Just to see, how does it impact on rural communities? How does a policy, how does a strategy impact on them? Because what we are finding is that we are falling further and further behind. In 3 years ago, our poverty measure was 20%. It is now 22%. So instead of staying still even, we are falling further behind, and that is because of the larger structural issues that are happening that cannot be addressed by the Department for Communities, cannot be addressed by any individual department, but has to be a joined up approach. But it has to be done with us in local government also, because we know, and with our community and voluntary sector partners, we know the real issues that exist on the ground at a very local level.
Thank you. Yep. Melissa, Lannery, another question.
Thank you, Sean, you're all very welcome here today, and Una, whom I've worked with previously as well, in the Derry City and Strabane Council area. And I just noticed here, I post this out to our officials, that that would be an angst when we see a wee placard that just says Derry City Council. It's Derry City and Strabane, because the Strabane people will really feel left out. And you know that. Exactly what I'm saying. But again, too, just homing in on what has already been said, in terms of mitigation per se, where it seems to be the case that the greater emphasis on that is on mitigation as opposed to other strategies. And I picked up very directly from yourself as well, that you're disappointed in what it is that has been presented to us. Currently, we'll say as maybe the draft strategy in relation to addressing poverty. And I'd welcome just the comments of others on that as well in relation to that. And in what way that, again too, that you feel that you can, we'll say within your own council area, address that imbalance, i.e. from it just being merely, we'll say, mitigating factors as opposed to other strategies.
Thank you. And through the chair, the disappointment really was around the fact that there was a huge body of work previously done by the expert panel that had been set up. So as a department, you had invested, you had identified these individuals that you felt were best placed to give you advice. And that panel came back with a series of recommendations, and we couldn't see how those recommendations were taken on board, or if they had been considered, why they were considered that they shouldn't be included within the main strategy then going forward. And the whole idea about the act, about setting targets is really important, because I think we can just go a bit of adrift and not really see where the end's in sight. So if any of us were to look back in 10 years' time, what would success look like for us? And I think that that's why we need those types of structures in place. And so the type of interventions that only you as a government can do around policy decisions on mitigation. So what are you going to do with the welfare reforms? So once you come towards the end of that period, what's your decision going to be? You need to start to make decisions around that now and understand what the implications are going to be. Are there new policies as an executive that you should be looking for that would allow you, for example, to monitor energy, in terms of oil? So there's things that we felt that as a government, as a Northern Ireland executive, that you could have taken forward in relation to that. And local government, without a doubt, has a major part to play. And earlier we talked about the whole system approach, that you need all the partners, and all the partners need to understand what their role and responsibility is. And would we be administering programmes? Well, it's the community and voluntary sector, so all of those partners, we're more the facilitators. We just bring the voices to the table, and they help us to identify where we can actually make things happen. So I think that's where we should see ourselves going forward.
Very briefly, please, Melissa.
And just that in order to make the strategy transformative, what would you prioritise? And probably each one of you would have a different priority there.
You've got, again, the likes of Joseph Rowntree Foundation that has done a huge amount of work and analysis. It's done scenario planning to say, look, if you were to do an intervention for families who we know are one of the highest risk groups, that would make a material difference. So I think you need to look at what's there and what's available that's providing evidence in terms of having an impact. People with disabilities, we can see clearly, and we know that from lots of information that comes forward, the cost that it is. So I think that you need to target, you need to prioritise, and see that that's where you can make a difference.
Chair, I think it's very difficult to say one thing. In that I think there are short-term measures, and I know that this week alone, and we will all have heard on the news about the increase in fuel prices and whatever. I know that the number of increased calls that we have taken in the last week in relation to how are they going to survive, how are people going to survive. So there are very immediate short-term actions that need to be taken, and I suppose that's councils at a local level at this stage will have to address those. I think in long term, I think those structural issues are absolutely vital. In order to address, whether it be transport, whether it be social security, whether it be childcare strategy, whether it be employment or whatever like that. I think they're all vital, and there's no one fix to this. This is all cross government.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to have to move on, Melissa.
Just very quickly.
Very briefly.
One priority, I think, that you should be heard. I get the impression that someone's not listening to you. In that respect, and
okay, Melissa,
I think you should be here.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentations today. I think these sessions have been incredibly useful to all of us and to us as a committee. I'm particularly struck, John, by the stats you took from the Marie Curie document. That's pretty horrendous, that 22% of the population dying in poverty. And that's clearly not what we want to see. And there's serious issues around fuel poverty and poverty in general. I'm just wondering if you want to give us your assessment on the effectiveness of a scheme like the Warm Healthy Homes in particular, or programmes like that in reducing poverty locally. And I'm especially thinking about the rurality of many of your council areas and the impact that the price of oil and gas has on the availability of people to actually change. So the question is for the council's assessment, Chair, on those schemes, and what more of a role could you play in rolling out those or targeting those schemes into the right places?
Well, I think we're best placed as local partners with government to be able to deliver on that, because we work very closely with partnerships. I think somebody else had mentioned here around we're uniquely placed to have that working on the ground knowledge in terms of what it looks like for people on the ground. In terms of what we could do better, well, if we had additional resources from yourself, but it's all about long term, because what we find is we come to a certain time of the year, pressure's put on, and then it's very short term and it's not sufficient, as you were saying. And in terms of like what resources were given, we didn't have an open scheme like yourself because we knew would be inundated. So ours was very much based on a referral basis with our local food banks and our social supermarkets and our advice centres and community organisations. So I think less short-term response, more long-term commitment in terms of the model. That the wraparound model is a fantastic model, and that's something that you have worked on yourselves in terms of the social supermarket scheme that you resource councils to deliver with our partners. But again, it's an annual scheme. We do get in-year resources, which then it's very difficult because of the way we work to be able to administer and get that out the door. We found the same with advice services. Access as well for warmer homes initiatives. I understand that the scheme that councils were running, a lot of that was passed over to the housing executive. So again, it's a little bit too little and not enough time to deliver it. So I think we need to look seriously around that short-term interventions, specifically in rural areas, because the reliance on oil is particularly high, and just disposable income is an issue. We have we have a higher than average older population in our area. A lot of them are isolated. And really, we I think, and I again had seen or spoke about earlier on, that really came to the fore in relation to COVID, but also the neighbourliness of local communities. So we do have resources there, but we do need to value those and give them a proper place around the table, and really listen to their expertise. We work very closely with our partners, as I say, and with the likes of the GP federations, and I think it's right resourcing and continued dialogue as well.
Thank you. Through the chair, one of the things that we have found is that whenever programmes are very defined, it can narrow, in terms of who will actually benefit from it. And whenever I said about the learning journey that we were on, so we moved from food parcels to voucher type schemes to more or less like cash. So if a family is in support and they need support, well, here's the range of outlets that you can actually use a voucher scheme, and that to me has been, the dignity of the family and the individual, because who are we to, identify? So a person might be struggling to pay for their food this week, but next week they might be able to buy shoes for their kids, or the week after it might be something else. And so for that reason, whilst they are all really, really of benefit, those individual programmes, I think we need to look at a broader approach in terms of what families or individuals need at that particular time.
Thank you. Okay, Morris, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I suppose, like Cathy, I identify with one of the three presentations, but thank you very much to each and every one of you for coming here today. And it's really in relation to the delivery mechanism that councils, I always find that councils are experts at delivery, but often under-resourced and undervalued. However, yeah, I know, my opinion. But one of the things that the councils, I believe, are all individual. They all have individual different areas. And Causeway is my area, so I'm familiar more with Causeway than the others. and I do know that we struggle for housing and inward investment and employment opportunities. We have a population who are leaving the borough for work, and we have a population who are coming into the borough to retire, which skews the figures and gives us a high rating of older people. But in delivering an anti-poverty strategy, what weight, Julie, would you put on employment opportunities and investment in the area to bring down the number of people leaving for work and the number of people coming in for second homes and lets, etc., etc.? Excuse me.
Well, we actually we deliver a pupil voice programme where we engage local people, local young people, from secondary schools, and I think there was about 10 schools represented, and they engaged with local councillors last week, and we did a poll, and 66% of them were not coming back. So that's a huge issue for us, and yet we have a newly refurbished regional college, we have a university in place, and we are one of the most beautiful places we live in the world. But our issue is we have, as you know, we have seasonal employment. It's low pay, seasonal, part-time employment opportunities in the borough, and I think there needs to be more of a value put on tourism and retail sectors in relation to what that looks like for the employers. Inward investment's obviously a huge issue. We need to bring back some form of industry into the area, and I know we have labour market partnerships which are absolutely fantastic in terms of creating pathways for individuals to increase their employability opportunities and their skills, but it needs to be connected with what local employers need, what the labour market needs. And I think when we looked at research, the Labour Market Partnership did an analysis, and our digital skills are very, very low in the area. But people aren't staying because, as you say, people can't afford to stay. There's a lot of intergenerational living where grannies and mums and dads and grandchildren are all having to live in the same area. So for me, it is around creating the opportunity for increased inward investment, really taking our economic partnerships seriously, continuing to resource the labour market partnerships, and we really do need to look at the housing issue. I think how we measure housing success needs to have additional indicators to look at, how many people are spending more than 30% of their income in relation to housing. It's a huge issue in our area, and second homes, and it used to be student populations, now they're in the university, and then we have a family hotel, obviously, for asylum seekers. So again, there's a housing issue around that too. So employment is a big issue.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, Mark.
I won't ask any more.
Thank you, Mark.
For brevity.
We have a couple more to do, and we have significant further business to conduct today. So I'm going to Mark and Shan there as briefly as possible, please. Mark.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome again to everyone. It's heartening to hear all the good work that has been done, the range of intervention across and even within council areas. I'd obviously be most familiar with what's going on in the Derry City and Strabane district council area. Now, it's clear from what I get and what we suspected that departments aren't really doing enough, or certainly could be doing more to tackle poverty, and councils have really been forced to take matters into their own hands. And you've selflessly, I suppose, but correctly identified challenges facing your partners in the community and voluntary sector, but councils aren't impervious to these challenges either. And where we do have in theory a scheme from council or an intervention that recognises deprivation across council areas through the rate support grant, it has been hollowed out largely over the last decade, I suppose, with the exception of the COVID years when there was additional funding there. I was just wondering, what are the challenges that creates for councils, of course, but also for the people, the people that you serve?
I could maybe come on because I'm sure we're all affected by it, but certainly we're very significantly affected by it. And if I can maybe give some figures, in 2008-9 we were receiving about £20.5 million through the rate support grant. Currently that's just slightly over 3.1 million, so an absolutely massive decrease, and it's the least wealthy councils that are bearing the burden of this, and it's the councils that are more rural and more deprived. And what that means for us is that we have to put extra rateage on for the poundage just to get up to where a more wealthy council would be. So for us that means that we can do less services because we've at a disadvantage already. We're already having to put extra money or rates on, and then particularly for our residents having to pay higher rates bills. So we've put in a very significant response to the review that's ongoing, and our call really is we couldn't take any further cuts, and if anything for you and all the lobbying that you can do is actually look to see how you can increase that pot going forward.
Sadly, the review's complete. It was looking at how the pie is cut rather than the size of the pie. Unfortunately, but it is clear that action and intervention and protection is required in that respect. But I'm conscious of time, Chair. So well.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Sian, please.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. First of all, I just want to note how your perception of the engagement with the department has been through this process, and what it should be, or what you would see that it should be going forward. What would be the ideal, especially because I think most have said about clarity of purpose of the local government sector, and also some have said that the strategy as it stands doesn't really assess the role that local government actually plays.
Chair, I suppose, with regard to the development of the draft strategy itself, I suppose there was very, very limited engagement with local government in relation to it. There was some engagement towards the end of the consultation process, the anti-poverty strategy engagement sessions. But even since that, there has been very, very limited engagement as to how it could be improved. So I suppose if we are saying that local government is a very important delivery partner in making sure and to find out the lived experience about what is happening on the ground and the different issues that, whether it affect Derry City and Strabane Council, on the different issues that affect Fermanagh and Omagh, the only way to find out that is from local bodies at the table. And I suppose from our point of view, we have been disappointed with that level of engagement in coming up with a strategy that will work for us, that will in some way address the issues and the factors that will improve the poverty in our district.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a good note to finish up on. I think that has been a strong element of all of the sessions in relation to today's work. I want to thank each of you for coming along. It's been really useful to hear those individual elements and factors, as well as where there's harmony and synergy across all of the councils. But I think, just to reiterate, I think we see councils as being a key element in many aspects of the work of this committee, but in particular in relation to the anti-poverty sector. I think individually and collectively as a committee, we really value the work that councils have done, but also the opportunity that councils can bring in moving forward. So thank you for that, and we'll move on to further actions, but thank you and good luck today. So thank you, members. I want to then, as it said, we would take a note of a number of potential actions, and one of the things that occurs to me as a result of this session is I think there's really a strong opportunity for a motion in relation to this work, to the Assembly, to capture the key elements that we have heard today and potentially bring those forward as a motion to the Assembly. So that's one thing I want to suggest. Would members go ahead, Sian?
Yeah, it's something I was going to suggest, and happy to support a motion. It's either that or even a mini report to send through to the department. I think there is so much learning that we have just gleaned. Sorry to give the clerk team any suggestion of more work, but I think there's so much information that we've gleaned, both from the reports that we received from our council colleagues, but also those presentations. So happy with a motion if we can then reflect some of the learning, or indeed a short report that we can send over to the department.
Yeah, well, just let me check with the clerk. First of all, if that
They're not mutually exclusive.
yeah, could we bring the report as a motion? Could we pull the report together, then bring that as a motion to
yeah, that would be the process. Yeah.
I think that would be useful, because I think the main report is correct. There's some very tight and specific evidence there,
and real solution-based focuses from some of those councils as well.
So mini report based on the evidence heard by the committee today.
Yeah. And with a view to then bringing forward that via a motion to the Assembly. Members agreed with that?
What will our motion be asking?
Well, we'd have to agree that, we'd have to agree that what the motion would be asking, but I think we'll be informed by the report as to what the motion might ask for. So it'll be a two-stage process. Okay. Yeah. Melissa?
Yeah, just on that too, Chair, and I know that the very first delegation that we had on here, they actually alluded to it, and that was when they referenced NILGA. And I think that we actually should have, we should invite NILGA to address this panel as well, because again, they're an organisation that will represent all of the councils and the area, and it is quite shocking, just some of the stuff that we've actually heard here in terms of the disappointment that is felt, we'll say, within councils as far as communication is concerned, in a sense, so that I do think it'd be worthwhile, very, very important for us to have NILGA in here too.
Members content with that?
Agreed, yeah.
Agreed, yeah. Kelly?
Just going to say that in our strategic goals in the programme for government is to address poverty, social exclusion and disability support. It was brought up, I can't remember who it was and which council it was that brought it up, but if poverty is a strategic goal, they'd mentioned about an anti-poverty impact assessment. Is that something that we can ask the department? Is there any consideration being made in the same way as the rural impact assessment has been brought forward, that an anti-poverty impact assessment in order to measure and to ensure that strategic goals in the programme for government are being delivered is being brought forward by the department?
Yeah. Members content with that?
Can I just clarify, is that as a letter to the department now or following as a recommendation in the report?
Now, because it has a play on how departments then will be going forward with their different activities. So it's not part of this report, but it's just come out of that. Yeah, what we heard.
You're content with that, Clerk, and members content with that? Yeah. Okay, members, thank you. So moving on to agenda item 10 then is matters arising, and members have been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 166. There are also some in table pack which I'll come to, but for now we're dealing with the main pack. As usual, I'll ask members for comments, and if you could just refer to whichever item it is you're speaking to. I suppose one that I did want to draw out today was 10.4 is the draft budget response to the clerk. That's been updated based on briefings heard at last week's meeting and included now as additional information as requested by members. Could I ask if members will be content that we allow a bit more time for members to have a look at that, and then any amendments or additions or suggestions members want to make to come back to that? When would we need to be coming back to you with that, Clerk? To include for a decision next week?
Monday.
So Monday, could members agree we come back by Monday?
Yeah, Monday, yeah, lunchtime Monday.
Monday lunchtime?
The pack goes out on Monday afternoon.
Just one comment I've got, this section where we reference the strategies, if we can emphasise the disability strategy, because the disability and disability work strategy, I know it's a bit of a tongue twister, but the disability strategy is not included in that.
Yep, okay. Thank you. Are there any other items within matters arising that members want to flag up or draw attention to? All members otherwise content with the memo as per the...
Could I ask one question? It's on that paragraph 25. It sort of sits to the side of this. I'm not 100% certain in the fraud and error part if we get the go-ahead with Treasury, for this money to be returned. Is it hypothecated or unhypothecated money that's coming back? Can we ask?
We have asked that.
We have asked that.
I think we did get a response.
I think it was unhypothecated.
Unhypothecated.
Right, okay. Okay, that answers.
The Minister said that he would be certainly seeking the money, but it would go to the executive, as is always the case with anything that comes back.
That was my understanding too. Okay, anything else then? Otherwise, I'm moving on to the table pack, which can be found at items 10.7 and 10.8, can be found in your table papers. Are there anything issues that members wish to advise? Or in relation to 10.8, this corresponds to the Department in relation to the Sign Language Bill, departmental amendments. Just to advise members that it's really for noting prior to the bill's consideration stage in plenary. So I'd ask that everyone note those technical amendments just, please. Yeah. Otherwise, that concludes matters arising for today. And moving on then to correspondence at agenda item 11. So as usual, we'll go through those. There's a fair bit of correspondence there today. So I'll move through them in blocks. So, and indicate, see if you wish to highlight any other actions or if you're content to confirm the step as proposed in the memo. And the memo is at item 11.1, starting on page 190 of the pack. So, 11.5 is a memo from Audit Committee regarding correspondence between the committee and the Minister for Communities. Are there any issues then from item 11.2 to 11.10 that members want to flag up? Are members otherwise content? The next bundle then is 11.11. And 11.13 is a request from the Department to consider a joint briefing session with the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs and the Committee for Infrastructure regarding the Sustainable Places Programme. The committee team have identified a possible slot for that on 21st of May. If members wish to schedule this, the team will then liaise with the other committees for their availability on that date. So can I ask if members are content to schedule that for 21st of May? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could I ask if we could get something just in writing, a bit more detail about what they're coming to talk to us about? Because if there's 3 committees coming together, you know, there may not be an awful lot of time.
This is quite unusual in that it's a request from the department chair. We haven't had the request from other committees, so it may just be that this committee receives the other officers, but we will check with the other committees if they want to hold a joint committee under Standing Order 64.
Yeah, okay. So moving on then to item 11.14 is a memo from the clerk to the committee for the Executive Office regarding the impact of the Windsor Framework and wider EU matters. The committee has sent this correspondence to all statutory committees, requesting any updates on issues identified. I'd be keen to highlight the issues around the shared prosperity and local growth fund. I think those would be important if members are content. Do members have any other comments or any other issues that wish to be included within that response? And are members content that the team go ahead and draft a response for consideration? Yeah, thank you. 11.1.9 is correspondence in relation to local government draft code of audit practice. The code is due its 5-year statutory refresh when the draft is approved in plenary. It was last approved in 2021 with minimal debate. I suppose, however, there is a broader outstanding issue regarding local government auditors' reports. In 2022, the Assembly's Audit Committee published a review of the governance and accountability arrangements for the NI Audit Office and the NI Public Services Ombudsman. That report identified accountability gaps created by having a separate local government auditor and recommended establishing a single public sector auditor. The Assembly approved that recommendation in February 2022. However, it would appear that this has not yet progressed because it would require primary legislation and executive agreement, which has not yet been forthcoming. So given this background, do members wish to invite departmental officials and or the local government auditor to brief the committee on the refreshed local government code of audit practice? Just to get eyes on that, yeah, thank you. Okay, members, anything else within item 11.1 to 11.19 that members wish to highlight?
Just that 11.17 on the bites, room 29. Just
Tuesday.
It's just going to be the lunchtime one, yeah.
Yeah, that's the joint briefing with the Finance Committee.
Okay.
It would be great if I could get an indication of numbers just for that.
Yeah.
Because it's 2 committees.
So I'm able to attend at the start, but I will have to leave during that briefing for another meeting. So
any other members can let me know.
Yeah.
Should be there.
Okay, I'd encourage as many members as possible, please. Okay, members, moving on then to the tabled correspondence memo, which is page 1. Just let me check that members are content with the correspondence memo as per the main pack. Yep. Tabled correspondence and a memo at page 126 with further items of correspondence. Do members have any comments in relation to tabled correspondence items? Members content with the memo as noted in the tabled pack? Yep. Agenda item 12, members' forward work programme, a copy of which is at page 513. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme? Content, thank you. Agenda item 13, any other business? Do members have any other business they wish to raise? No, thank you. Members, moving on then to agenda item 14, date, time and location of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 12th of March 2026 here in room 29 in our normal room in Parliament Buildings, and this meeting is now adjourned. Gora Mila Moyagov.
There's a lot of information today.
Senate Chamber. Sound.